Good morning.
I'd like to call the Budget and Public Employees Committee hearing to order. Madam Clerk, if you mind, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Odenberg. Alderwoman Schweitzer. Present. Alderwoman Sanye.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Odenberg. We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And today on our agenda, we have just one item, which is Board Bill number 1, our city's budget. And today we are hearing from all 3 enterprise funds for the city of St. Louis, recognizing that, we don't necessarily have budgetary authority over those, but for informational purposes for our committee. And we are also hearing the budget of the treasurer's office. So it's kind of an unusual setup, and we're going to learn about it today. So Treasurer Lane, if you would come before us. And I always try to state this at the beginning. It's helpful to remind our speakers to introduce themselves, and for the folks at home and for recording, just to speak into the microphone. Thank you, Frank. Okay. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Lane. I'm the treasurer for the city of St. Louis. I'm joined by my chief of staff and my assistant treasurer today. So we have the presentation that you just got is the enterprise fund, and I know that you all have the treasury budget, which is part of Board Bill 1, so I can start where you want me to start. I figured I'll go with the shorter one, maybe the less involved and less complicated one, which is the treasury budget. So I will be speaking overall, or just giving an overview of that piece of the budget, really just where our biggest jumps are, areas to highlight, and I always like to give gratitude to my staff as well. So I'll do that and add some color there. And then we can answer questions on that, and then we can move on to the parking enterprise budget, if that works for you all.
I think that is a perfect plan. So let's, starting with the treasurer's office, and I'd like to kind of get everybody grounded in where we are in our budget books. The treasurer's office is located, did anybody already find it? 205? Okay. In our line item detail? Okay. Okay, and in our
104.
operating plan, 104. Great, thank you so much, Alderwoman Schweitzer. Okay, let's start with the treasurer's office.
Excellent. So I'll start.
Actually, if you don't mind, Treasurer, could you explain, so what's kind of just the unusual setup, how, just for educational purposes, kind of, how you have 2 budgets and why that is? It's just from
Absolutely. So, yep, the treasurer's office, particularly the Treasury Department, is one of our city departments. So that's housed in City Hall. What we do in the Treasury Department is, well, one, first and foremost, make sure all of our employees are paid. So we pay all the bills for the city. We also do reconciliations for the accounts of the city. So every city department has their own accounts from which they spend, so we make sure that that's in line with the city budget director and what the comptroller set and what you all deem necessary as a board of aldermen for us to spend our money on. So we make sure the bills get paid, and we make sure that we're spending money on the right thing. So that's primarily the role and function of the Treasury Department. We also manage all the investments for the city. So we have an investment portfolio of about $700 million. We also have fund advisors by state statute that we work with to make sure that we're maximizing the investments of the city, which has been going pretty well in this high interest rate environment. So it's good to have money, and we're taking the stance that we want to make sure that we are maximizing the value, the long-term financial sustainability of our city. So we do those 2 things on the Treasury side. We also have an Office of Financial Empowerment that rolls up under our Treasury Department. My vision is to make sure that we have a city and its residents financially fit. So not only that the Treasury Department or the city of St. Louis is doing well financially, but want to make sure the people who live here, work here, call St. Louis home, even the young ones that will be adults, we want to make sure that they're growing economically and they have access to capital and resources to improve their economic mobility. So that's what we do on the Treasury side. We also have the parking division. So the parking division rolls up under my control as well. And parking is separate, so that's why the Treasury Department is part of Board Bill 1 because we use city funds to fund that department. And parking is not. So parking is its own entity, so parking is not funded by the city budget. The parking division spends what it makes. So there's a lot of, well, we'll get to the parking budget, but there's a lot of capital that goes into managing the amount of garages and lots that we have, as well as on-street parking. So the revenue that's generated through parking, 40% of that goes back to the city, and the other 60% is used to reinvest in our parking infrastructure and also be nimble and make the necessary adjustments to do parking right for the city of St. Louis.
Okay, thank you, Treasurer. Okay, so let's go through we'll start with the Treasurer's Office, which is under the city management and part of Board Bill number 1.
Right. So I'll highlight just some of it's not the most exciting budget, so I'll highlight some of the big pieces and big changes, some that you're probably already familiar with because of the meetings that you've already had and departments that you've already heard from. So with the biggest and first line item, salary and wages going up, obviously that majority of that is because of the across the board increases announced by our mayor. So we're in line with that, and you'll see we're actually in line with that for our parking division budget as well, even though it is a separate enterprise fund. We want to make sure that we are consistent and we're doing different things over there as well. So that's the biggest line item jump that you'll see on the Treasury Department. Everything else is pretty standard, and also sticking with the salary and wages, and again, that gratitude. We were probably at, half staff in our Treasury Department for a good majority of the year, which I really commend my staff for being able to navigate that challenging time, but we're back up to full staff. We have some great employees there. So I'm happy that they're on board, and that allows us to do the things that we've been able to do, which is save about, $3,000 a year in account fees, being able to manage accounts better with our other city departments and getting the best deals on the relationships that they have with their banks, as well as grow our investment portfolio, which was absolutely critical in this interest rate environment. We don't have a lot of major increases. Most of the things that do go up, they're going up slightly, and they're going up because we're in a rising cost environment. So we are making sure that we're actively budgeting to reflect that. Let's see, anything else that we have here that's big? No, not really. That's pretty much it. We also know that we continue to see the price of paper. I don't know if this is consistent with the other departments, but just paper prices continue to increase, so we just make sure that we're increasing our budget along with that. But before we get to any questions, I'll bring up Christina, my assistant treasurer, to speak to any particular nuances of the budget that you want to highlight. Don't want to leave you out.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Christina Bennett, Assistant Treasurer. So I highlighted a couple of things historically. Fiscal year 2021, Treasurer Lane and I came on board. We had some high expenses. We came in, we reviewed the analysis. We actually manage about 45 bank accounts. We don't typically own a single bank account with the City of St. Louis. They're all belong to someone else's department. We just manage them. So we came in and, so for example, airport water, building division, all those are the department's respective bank accounts. We just manage the cash. So we don't own a treasurer's bank account per se. So we manage about 45 bank accounts across the entire, I call it enterprise. And so in coming there, we probably saved about $16,000 in fees and restructures when we looked at the reorganization of accounting for respective accounts. We have been the liaison for a lot of our bank account, for our departments. So we come in and do RFPs, we restructure analysis fees, we look at pricing for our 45 accounts. So we've been able to do that effectively over the last 2 years. Going forward, the biggest jump you're going to see in the budget is under professional services. And that's going from probably a budget of $15,000 to $25,000. So that's a $10,000 increase. That is one of the reasons we asked Director Paul Payne on the budget division, because we have to do an RFP for our custodial services going forward. So in line with the mandates that I was given in 2021, we will go ahead and complete a lot of the outstanding items that we wanted to address on an operational level. So we completed an RFP in 2022 for investments, and now we're going to do a RFP for custodial services. Last time we did it, it cost $10,000. I told Budget Director Payne that if I can do it internally, we will save that $10,000. But that's the largest increase you're going to see in our budget on the Treasury side. We've been able to elevate, as Treasurer Lane said, we were at 8 employees when I arrived, and we functioned for the last 9 months with 4 employees, and only 2 of us that actually managed the accounting and investments. So we are at full staff. We've got 1 more position to fill. We should fill that in the next 30 days, and we will be back to full staff. One of the blessings that I have to thank the city is that we've been able to elevate some of the price or the salary ranges so that we can get actually qualified higher level staff to be able to do what we need to do now that we're managing over $1 billion in assets in cash.
So just going through just understanding how all these functions are funded, the treasurer's office is a total of 1.5 million out of the general fund for the treasury management piece, or and payroll and all that, right? Or
No.
Looking at our 104, we've got a $1.5 million budget, 942,000 of which come from the general fund, and 564,000 come from a grant.
No. So the 942 is, we're a cost center. So that's what the city pays for. 942 is for the cost center.
Okay, and that's for the treasury management.
That's only for, yes, treasury and cash management, but also accounting. We also do the accounting for a lot of departments that do not have accounting functions.
And then the grants and other funds, what can you,
You mean the OFE office?
it isn't clear here in the budget, so I've got a 940, we're just trying to understand like the big picture.
So the 942 is the cost center, I have to say.
Okay.
So that's what the city general fund pays. Okay. Then
Right.
if you look at the OFE budget, that does not paid by the general fund. That is paid by parking, and the general fund pays it, and then the parking reimburses. So,
Wait, and is that the other piece of this then? So is the Office of Financial Empowerment is part of the treasurer's office or part of the parking division?
It's part of the Office of Financial Empowerment, which wraps up under Treasury, but it's funded by the Parking Division.
So the parking division funds the Office of Financial Empowerment, but its personnel is under the treasurer's office. I didn't realize that.
Correct.
Okay, so that would be the other grant funding then? Is that just like a grant from the parking division?
yes.
Okay, and
Are you talking about the 564?
yes.
Yeah, the pass-through, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, is that pass-through part of the 40% that you mentioned earlier that comes back to the city?
No.
No, that's a separate line item, okay.
Correct.
So the Office of Financial Empowerment can you explain that? That's sort of the flagship program for the treasurer's office for our new committee members.
Sure. So what the Office of Financial Empowerment is, the goal is financial dignity for all. So the Office of Financial Empowerment is geared toward, like I was saying earlier, making sure that every St. Louisan has the ability to live their best financial life. So another thing that we do in our Treasury Department, we work with 16 now different bank partners, and they do cash, they do accounting, they hold accounts for the city. But we also, one of the things I want to make sure that they're doing is investing in St. Louis. So if they're banking partners that are in St. Louis City and they're getting the city's dollars to be able to make interest and make money off of, we want to make sure that they're doing right by St. Louis City. And the people who live here. So we call on our banks to do presentations. So they do financial presentations in our OFE classroom. We do presentations out in community. And these are things that we ask them to do so that we can get people access to capital. So St. Louis has historically had the highest numbers of unbanked and underbanked Black and brown folks and low to moderate income people in our city. So we want to work, our Office of Financial Empowerment is working to change that. change that narrative. So part of what we do is, again, these classes and presentations. We also have one-on-one financial coaching. So we help people get banked, one, increase their credit scores, two, learn about saving, learn about budgeting. Just this weekend, we were at the All Hands on Deck event hosted by the Department of Health, and we were forgiven parking tickets, but and we had our Office of Financial Empowerment there, met a young woman about 32 years of age who never had a bank account. So these are things that we connect people to because we know that that economic mobility is important. It does start with banking with a credible banking institution, especially when there's so many predatory lenders out there in the city of St. Louis. And I always say it's one thing to know the right thing to do, but it's also very important to avoid the mistakes. So those mistakes are really what set people back. So people come to us, they'll come to our office, they've made some financial mistakes in the past, and they want to get back on track. You all know about development in the city and making sure that we have buildings for people to live in, and also that we don't add to gentrification. One of those things is making sure that the people in those neighborhoods have the credit scores, have the financial capability to be able to buy those houses that we're building in these neighborhoods that we want to see development in. So that's what we do. We also have so that's for the adults and young adults. We also have our College Kids program. Because we want whole home financial literacy. So we want the youth to get the same thing that the adults are getting, and our bank partners help us with that as well, but we also have in-house programming that we do for our youth to make sure that financially literate kids turn into financially literate adults. So if we can attack it on both ends, we know that the same messages about financial prosperity are happening in the home. We think that's going to lead to, and we've already seen that leading to better economic outcomes for low to moderate income families in St. Louis.
I'll turn it over to the committee for some. That's a good question. The revenue for I think that would be out of the parking division, right? So I think we'll get to that separately. So then I guess, as we consider the treasurer's budget, this is not a revenue generating budget. It's something that city is paying for out of pocket to manage the investments. So
I meant because he had mentioned that the parking revenues were paying for the Office of Financial Empowerment. I just didn't see parking or treasurer on
Correct.
this, and I was just looking for how much it was overall.
I think we'll get into that in the second piece, right? Thanks. Because I think,
That sounds good. Thank you.
yeah. I'll turn it over to the committee members for questions. Going in order of seniority and presence, Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Treasurer Lane, for being here. Thank you all for being here as well. The Treasurer's Office staff has always been really easy to work with, and I appreciate how quick you all are getting back to me on issues and things. I think more of my questions are about parking and parking enforcement and how that interacts with parking citywide with enforcement, not only at cars at meters, but when we have cars that don't get, moved for weeks and weeks, how you interact with the streets department. That's something that I think is both one, the tow lot does produce revenue for the city of St. Louis, and I'd rather have the cars on the streets producing revenue, and just knowing how much more money we need to be getting into the city. So my questions will be more around that, but I appreciate you being here, and I'm just grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Saunier.
I just had a question about, you guys mentioned staffing, so you're at full staffing capacity now?
Almost. So we have one more position, and then we will be.
Okay, and you said there's 8 staff?
8 staff, correct.
Okay. And that's what about, thank you.
The budget indicates 9.5 and 4 from other funds.
There are 8 staff in Treasury, and then we would have 4 in OFE. So we would have 4 in the OFE Fund 1116, and then 8 for Treasury. And I had a part-time employee that just terminated recently, so.
The budget indicates 9.5 from the general fund. So I just for clarity on that discrepancy.
So the half employee is, we have one accountant that Treasury pays half the salary and airport pays half. So that's why you see a half, because that is a joint combined employee, and that employee is strictly focused on the airport investments, accounting, cash, and whatnot. So they needed a higher level experience on that account, so they agreed to pay half of that employee.
There's still a missing human from that.
Yes,
Okay, and the last person.
yes, I'm sorry, I don't include him in my staff because I don't,
Yeah,
but he is,
no, but it's 8 full-time in treasury, then the treasurer, and then the person who helps with accounting with the things you just
right,
named.
and then yes.
Okay,
So Treasurer Lane and his assistant are on the treasury budget, but I don't manage those two employees. I manage the ones in 220.
yeah, okay, thank you.
Sometimes she manages me.
That's the end of my questioning.
Alderman Aldridge?
Thank you, Treasurer Lane, for being here and your staff. I don't have any questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, then let's turn it over to the parking fund.
All right, so I will walk you through, again, big budget items and allow you all to ask any questions that you have related to the budget or just the entire parking enterprise. So the
Treasurer, do you mind just explaining, I mean, we could just for, I did not know what an enterprise fund was before I became an alderperson and realized that we have 3 of them here in the city. So if you could just give a brief summary of what an enterprise fund is and why the parking division is set up as such.
Sure. So an enterprise fund, well, the way the parking division is set up, so it's a city entity that generates revenue. So the parking division does generate revenue to be able to provide a service, and it's has certain authorities, so bonding authority, being able to issue debt, to be able to do new infrastructure like a parking garage in our sense, or a new lot. There are a lot of expenses, as you'll see, that come with managing a parking enterprise. So being able to, like I was saying before, be nimble and adapt to the times as a quasi government but for-profit entity, because it does generate that profit, and be able to turn those profits into R&D and things that we need to make infrastructure improvements. That's essentially what we do here at the parking division. So being able to generate revenue to be able to provide a public service, but then with those revenues be able to reinvest that into both the parking division, but also use that as profit for the city of St. Louis. Enterprise in that it makes money or generates money to go to the city, but is not necessarily a city-funded entity or a tax-funded entity.
Typically speaking, enterprise funds don't share revenues with, or it's a little bit different setup, but I think we're the only city in the nation that has its parking division as an enterprise fund. I can't think of a single other one unless you can.
I can find out and get back to you, but we're also other cities. I haven't found a city yet that, well, not set up as an enterprise fund, because it's actually funded by tax dollars. The expenses are funded by tax dollars.
And then, well, in that case,
So you couldn't be an enterprise fund if you were funded by the tax dollars. So those other cities decide to fund it with tax dollars, and then they're not enterprise funds.
well, in those cases, all of the revenues go directly back into the general fund of the city. So there's a
Right.
different setup, yes.
But all the
entirely.
costs come from all of the cities bear those costs of the parking division as well.
Sure, but in a case of parking, revenues generated always exceed the cost of issuing parking tickets, unless there's otherwise very small instances, but it's a revenue generating entity in a general sense. So the balance is positive.
Well, as you'll see in the presentation, you'll see the percentage that do come from parking tickets, but parking is not just parking tickets. The infrastructure required for parking tickets is, well, it's a piece of paper. And then also our personnel, our wonderful parking enforcement officers that do an incredible job all across covering these 68.7 square miles of city. But there are also garages and lots. So those are the big infrastructure costs. And you'll see in our budget as well, the maintenance and upkeep required for that. And then also the servicing of the bonds that we issue to maintain our garages and lots are way more than parking tickets. So parking tickets actually don't cover the entirety of the budget for the parking division.
Well, let's go into it, Treasurer.
Let's do it. So, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, but just for, I think you're saying, sorry, I just want to clarify, you're saying the enterprise fund, just for people at home, because I think the question was just for everybody to have an understanding, is that it means that it doesn't come out of the city's budget, that this is, it covers its own costs and generates its own income.
Exactly. So it, separate from the city, so covers its own costs, generates its own revenue, and then gives a portion of that revenue back to the city. So it's a source of income for the city without having to spend taxpayer dollars or city budget dollars on.
Okay, thank you.
For clarity, generally speaking, a fee-generating office like this would share all of its revenue with the city. In the case of our parking division, the parking division is only required to share a portion of its revenues, and they keep the majority of the revenues. So we don't have to spend our money to write parking tickets, but generally speaking, a fee-generated office would share all of its revenues with the city. Like, so for example, the building division doesn't keep its profits. The parking division does keep the majority of the profits within the parking division.
So if I,
It is unusual in that way.
Yeah, no, I mean,
But we don't have to fund it, but like the building division also generates revenue. Does that make sense? And we do supply it with tax dollars, but we get more tax dollars out of it because it's a fee-generating office. Does that make sense? Yeah.
and if I could clarify and respectfully disagree, Madam Chair, that's, I think you're conflating a fee office with an enterprise fund, and that's why we are an enterprise fund. So we are not a fee-generating office like the building division. That's exactly why we are an enterprise fund. So a fee-generating office like the collector of revenue, like the license collector, their entire budget is funded by the city. That's why they are a fee-generating office and why their revenues go back to the city. Or why all of their revenues go back to, or a majority, I would say, of their revenues go back to the city. So it's it's funded in that way. But we wouldn't classify as a fee office. In fact, that's why we classify as a enterprise fund, because we literally are not a fee office. If we were a fee office, then again, I think the designation is that we are funded entirely by the general operating budget of the city, and we would roll up into Board Bill 1 in that way.
Well, the reason why it's not part of the general revenue is it was set up by the state of Missouri in that way, but parking in a general sense is a revenue-generating enterprise. That's why we have, that's why you mentioned it's a
Yep, I don't
for-profit
disagree
entity.
that it's revenue generating. I do disagree that it's a fee office.
Well, sure, it isn't, it is, I was making a comparison, not a conflation with the fee offices. In many cities, in most cities, it is set up as a
Fee
fee
office,
office.
right.
And just like those other ones. In this case, it isn't, but that was set up by the state of Missouri and not the city of St. Louis. And we are, to my knowledge, the only enterprise fund set up for parking in the United States.
and
that
it's
I
okay,
could-
I just,
I'm just saying, it is, that's why, I mean, why it's set up that way is something we'd have to ask the state legislature.
yeah. I just wanted to get a good idea of what an enterprise fund is, and I think once we walk through the budget, we can get into some of the other stuff.
The other ones, and it'll be helpful too to walk through all of the enterprise funds in a general sense, yeah. Okay, Treasurer, go ahead.
All right, so slide 2 and 3, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, since this is our first presentation to this group, and want to make sure you all have all the information that you need. So slide 2 compares our projected budget of last year to where we're projected to, our budget for last year and where we're projected to end. And the third one is just this year versus next year. So we wanted to give you just kind of a historical look at how we performed this year to date, and then also what we're looking at doing next year. So to date on slide 2, what you'll see is that we're pretty favorable in all of our categories. So personnel, we're favorable of about 15%. Supplies about we'll just say 26%. Contracts and other services, 6%. And then on our 27th payroll, and are you all familiar with what 27th payroll is? No? Okay. So, well, some of the other departments should have explained it, but we have the 27th payroll because in some years there is a 27th payroll period. So we fund that. So again, we were favorable there, but again, a majority of that is because of us being short-staffed, but we're no longer there. So that is good. So again, these are the numbers that were projected, and then also, so what we're budgeted for this fiscal year ending, and where we project to end. So we're doing well in that regard. Slide 3 will talk about, or slide 3 illustrates where we are projected to end this year, and then what we're budgeting for next year. So I did talk about, you see our personnel is going up by about 1.7 million. And again, the reason for that is because we, again, with this separation, even though there are increases across the board, increases that will be funded by the general fund for employees, city employees, because the parking division is an enterprise fund, that doesn't carry over. So we are not obligated, so to speak, to make those increase, that 4% increase, but we always want to stay in line with the city, because we still consider them city employees. They don't need to understand all the nuances of the differences in designations, but we want to make sure that all of our employees across the board in the city that work for the city are treated fairly. So we are increasing that as well. But another increase, and that comes out of our budget, that doesn't get, again, funded by the general budget for the city. And then we are also moving our parking enforcement officers from a base salary of $15 an hour, which we did back in 2018, so being the first city department to go up to 15, but we're increasing that base for next fiscal year up to $17 an hour. So that is and something that we've been talking about since probably about 2021. So when I started, and knowing that we are having issues, I'm sure you all have heard it in many of your meetings, having issues with securing personnel, hiring personnel, but we do think that people do want to be paid more and deserve to be paid a living wage. So we are increasing that base salary for our parking enforcement officers. The other things that we'll put in there, contractual services, we're also increasing there. Most of these, and you'll see once I get to the slide on what the upgrades are making on a technology and safety standpoint for our lots, garages, and then just the parking enterprise as a whole. You'll see where those increases are coming, but we're able to, again, adapt to the times, infuse more of a technology-driven approach to what we do in the parking division to make parking services as smooth and efficient as possible for people who park in and around our city. So if you move to the next slide, repair and replace. So repair and replacement is a big piece of what we do, and so this also has to be funded. So with any garage, if we built a garage tomorrow and it cost us $40 million to do so, every single year there is scheduled maintenance with that garage. So there's a lot of upkeep and a lot of dollars that are spent to maintain our garages, so they're not dilapidated and shut down like actually some of the garages that we don't own downtown. But we want to make sure that that maintenance is happening so we can continue to, one, generate that revenue, but also make sure that there are safe and reliable places for people to park. So 2023, you can go down the list and just see what was budgeted for repair and replace at a bunch of our garages, or at all of our garages. If you look at 2024, you can see some spikes in those numbers, but those are, again, just the scheduled maintenance that might be for that garage. So it could be power washing, it could be structural improvements, facades, all of those things. So there's a lot that, like I said, goes into the maintenance of these garages, and you can see those scheduled maintenance, those places where that scheduled maintenance is. And again, it depends on the year. So 2024, we want to make sure that we have those in place, and knowing that there was a lot of uncertainty around 2020, some of those things did get put off. So of course we have the recommended maintenance schedule, but we also do have the flexibility to know what is our window of time before we actually have to get on those infrastructure improvements before it's too late. So there are a lot of things that we could not do in the 2020-2021 year, and then with our engineers, we were able to see like what years could we put those off to make sure that we got those done and maintain and upkeep our garages. The next slide, you can see the parking division revenue budget. So this is what I was saying about the sources of income for the parking division. So yes, we do the parking meters. and we get those tickets in. But again, the garages, both the events and then our monthly parkers, those are big things for us. I want to highlight some of the projected variances. So if you look at, especially in two places, let's see. Yeah, so if you look at the Couples Garage and then the Shoto building. So the Shoto building is the building that is where the old Mauricio's used to be. So if you're familiar with that, that is the building where we have the garage, and we also have our some of our parking offices, there as well. So you'll see that variance go down about, we'll start with the Shoto. So you see that go down about 13%. During the pandemic, we've seen a lot of organizations that typically lease parking spaces for their employees go down with the move to virtual. We've had some folks completely shut down their operations and go 100% virtual, or they just need fewer spaces because half their team is going virtual. They realize they don't need to be in person anymore. So this economic shift has definitely impacted some of our garages and parking facilities. But with that, we know that we're getting a new tenant in the old Mauricio, so they closed up shop. They said they don't want to do it anymore. They're going to live out their days in Florida, in the sun and on the beach. But yeah, so we have a new tenant coming in, so we know that that will continue to drive the transient parking, so the daily parking that we see. But we do have spaces open, so we're looking at, there are some businesses in the area that we know that might be shifting their parking over to that garage. So we're projecting that that's going to go down in the next year until we get those contracts secured. The biggest one is the Couples Garage. I think that's been the biggest hit during in this post-pandemic world of virtual living. As of right now, and if you all want another presentation next year, we'll be happy to provide it. As of right now, we're projecting that to drop by 31% because of those master leases going away for those companies. But there is, if you're familiar, an apartment building that's going up right behind it. And we know that they've already reached out to us and they want to do master leases that will actually more than cover that 31%. But I did instruct my CFO of the parking division not to include that into our budget projections, because right now, as we know, because we're involved in a project with the garage right now, but we know that building times are going longer. So we don't want to account for it right now, especially if there's no certainty. We know when they are projected to open, I believe fall of next year or spring of next year. So we don't want to include that in case that timeline goes beyond our fiscal calendar, and then have to come back and explain why we didn't make those additional revenues. But we know that they will come, so hopefully I have some good news to report to you on that. But we didn't want to be overconfident and include that into our budget numbers for next year. Slide 6, you'll see our principal debt balance. So like I said, we have these garages. Garages take a lot of money to build. We are a bonding office, so we have the ability to issue bonds, which are debt to cover the construction and costs of new projects. So we haven't had any new projects. I think the last new project might not be on this one, but we don't have any new projects, so as you would expect, these should be going down. So, and they are. So over time, we're just reducing our principal debt balance, making sure that we make those debt payments and those coverages, which is also a big part of our budget for the parking division and things that we have to pay for. So as you would expect, you want those bonds to go down, or those principal debt balances to go down. One thing I will add, which is I think helpful for this group to know, we're always looking for ways to save money as a city, and especially as an enterprise fund that isn't just using city funds. We always want to look for ways to save money. Right before the rates went up, we had an opportunity to refinance some of our old bonds. They call it refund some debt. So just basically a refinance when rates were actually low. We did have a board bill that we had crafted, presented. It was sponsored but didn't go through, and that would have actually saved the city, the parking division, and thus the city, about $800,000. Yeah, but it did not go through. So I think that's important for this group to know that there are opportunities, and we will always seek opportunities to make sure that we're making the best financial decisions for this enterprise fund, for the parking division, for the city. And it would be great to have you all support and know how. And if there are questions that come up with things that we present in the future, feel free to reach out, but we will make sure that we reach out to this committee as well, even though this is not part of, Board Bill 1 technically. But it would be great to have that support. Next slide is about our total reserves. So it's always good to have a healthy amount of reserves. Reserves are important to any enterprise fund because things tend to happen like global pandemics. We were happy to not have to lay off any of our employees during the pandemic, even though we did stop our parking services for about 2 months. We instituted a parking and towing assistance program to help people who might be at home without a job at the time, not be going to work because of the layoffs and the uncertainty, be able to freeze those parking fines and fees and then pay those off gradually at a rate of $15 a month. But we instituted a lot of things to make sure that people were good during the pandemic. And reserves help us do that. Helps us to stay financially healthy, helps us to make those debt payments, those bond payments, even when income is slim. But as you can see, we did have a healthy amount of reserves, but there was a vote to take some of those reserves away, and you can see in 2019 and 2020 what that actually went to. So, and speaking of money that goes to the general revenue fund, in addition to that 40% that we are obligated by state statute, another about 16 million was voted to take away, and then you can see at the bottom where those went. So it was mostly a transfer from reserves to reserves, which again put us in a tough financial position, but we were able to recover. And as you can see, 2023, we do expect, or those reserves are going up. And we do expect them to continue. But again, that allows us to be very flexible, very nimble. There are a lot of things that happen. We're making wholesale, and you'll see those later, infrastructure changes, safety updates. We know that safety and parking, especially parking safety in the city of St. Louis, is something that's a big deal, and that is not regularly scheduled maintenance for us. So these are additional costs that we have to bear the brunt of, which we want to do because we want to make sure the city is as safe as possible, and that people have a good experience with parking in the city of St. Louis. So reserves and being able to have access to our reserves and plan for those does allow us to do that. Question? Tech upgrades. So you can see there just the list of tech upgrades that we're doing. Once we get to the questions, I can explain exactly what some of these are. But the things that I'm really excited about is number 2, cashless event pay. So right now, if you go to a game at the ballpark, usually what you'll see is you go somewhere. It's a lot. You got to have cash. We know that we're in 2023, not a lot of people carry cash. So now with the ballpark and the contract we were able to secure with them, folks can pay for parking using debit, credit, or app. And they can scan a QR code. We also have event parking as well. So I'm very excited about that. It allows it to be not only faster, more accessible, but also safer. So we want to make it safe for especially my employees that are working downtown. I don't want them to have $5,000 cash in their hand and now they become a target, but being able to take those electronic payments is really going to help for the safety as well as the accessibility and ease at which people park. And then also, I would say that. And then we're also constantly upgrading our meters, so we want to make sure that they're working fast. So we did spend about $700,000 or $650,000 to make sure that those mandatory upgrades happened. Next one, safety and security. So we are increasing our internal security, making sure that we have overnight security, roving security. So we do that at City Hall and in all of our garages. We previously outsourced that. It wasn't working well. It was just very unreliable. So we brought that in-house. So the folks that are working on our staff, they're part of our full-time team now, and we think that will help to have more consistency with the security that we're able to provide and more reliability. lot security measures. This is just, again, what we have projected to spend starting this summer for, bless you. Bless you.
Thank you.
For a bunch of our lots that we have across the city. Again, I know that there were talks of a board bill. Don't know where that is now, but we wanted to get ahead of that. I think it is important for the city to take a lead in a bunch of places. So if there are a lot of private parking enterprises that have lots on the city, and we want those to be as safe as possible. So we're taking our lead in making sure that we do that as well. So we've already budgeted, we've secured our bids, and we'll be issuing RFPs in the places where necessary to get all these gates, security cameras, and electrical upgrades to our lots all across the city. And then lastly, since we have been talking about the general revenue fund, just have what we've so going back about 10 plus years, a little bit more than a decade, so that everyone can see what our contributions have been to the general fund since 2010. And I will say that these numbers do not include, if you look at fiscal year 2021, just go ahead and add, you can go back to, what slide is that? Slide 7, I believe, and you can go ahead and add 11 million and 5.3 million to those 2 years total, respectively. Yes.
And then do you
That
have the
came from
fiscal year
reserves.
2023 or projections for 2024?
We don't have our 2024 projections yet, so that comes with our, once we finalize our numbers from year end.
I'm going to turn it over to the committee for questions, but recognizing that Alderwoman Schweitzer has to step out at 10:30, I'm going to give her the floor for some questions.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you for making that adjustment. Again, thanks for that whole presentation. I see a few different times from the general fund that money was spent to help with buying tow trucks and things like that. I had sort of brought up the question earlier, but one of the things my residents just deal with all the time is cars just sitting on their blocks and sitting there for a long time. And Streets Department and our liaison officers who work in that general field tend to have a hard time keeping up. Simultaneously, your office does some parking enforcement, and I think that question's been thrown around a lot. Where is the overlap? How can you help? What is your perspective on that?
Absolutely, great question. Thank you, Alderman Schweitzer. So we have really tried to strengthen our relationship with the Streets Department, and that's going well. Our parking division typically has a pretty good relationship with them. I know over the years we stopped booting and towing, and it was for many reasons. One, there was an ongoing investigation with the tow lot, and since we don't, a lot of people think we own the tow lot, we don't. But with that, we did not want to, we wanted to make sure that all the findings were done before, we got involved. That was one. And then two, I don't know if they've presented already, but the tow lot is pretty full right now, so we are going to begin booting and towing starting in July, restart booting and towing on the parking side beginning in July, because booting and towing has been, or towing has been happening. But yeah, so our parking enforcement officers do work hand in hand with the neighbors. So when they're going out for street cleaning, they tell me all the time they have great relationships with the people in their neighborhoods to be able to say, hey, this is a vehicle that needs to be towed. So we will ticket it, we will report it as well, so that it can get towed by the Streets Department. I know that it's just been tough because they're just running out of space. But we are continuing to ticket those vehicles, and we believe with the new tech that we're implementing and also our ongoing relationship with the tow lot, we're going to be able to get more of those cars off the street.
Great. I think the tow lot is very full. So, and there's a lot of cars still out there. Did you put in your increased projections for boots? Is that in here?
We do, and I think another, like you said, the tow lot is really a revenue generator for the city. It's not really a big revenue generator for the parking division. And you can see it. It's on. Sorry, let me find it for you.
Yeah, parking division revenue budget, third item.
So slide 5.
Yeah,
Yep.
ours aren't labeled,
I think we were projecting $40.
unfortunately. 40 million?
Or
Is it 40 million? All amounts are a million, so $40, does that mean 400,000? I'm not
That would
great
be,
at-
that's 40,000.
40,000.
Yes.
I think all amounts are actually thousands in this presentation. Otherwise, we would be looking at a total budget of 20
No,
billion.
no, some of them are in millions. But yes, so
We have
it's,
20,000 million revenue, $20,000 million in revenue. I think that it's actually in thousands. Otherwise, we would be literally looking at 20 billion.
Well
see
aware.
confusion.
yeah,
So can you, so the boots just
40K, yeah.
So
So we,
that's for 40,000.
right, so it's actually almost, it's, you know, one of those things where we say, we know that this is something that needs to happen, so we kind of eat those costs, because we actually have to buy the boots themselves, and then also in there is the LPR technology, so the license plate reader technology, which actually helps us to be able to identify what cars are bootable and boot eligible. And again, in a city which is small but big, it's tough for our parking enforcement officers to do that do that on foot, so yeah, so those are costs that we eat there.
I appreciate that. I understand that you're saying that when cars end up getting towed, it goes to the city budget, but, yeah, we could certainly use the money.
Yeah, yeah.
So I appreciate any mentality to, you know, not really think of it as, oh, this doesn't benefit my budget, but we need it to benefit the
Benefits the
city
city.
budget.
Yeah.
And I understand, you know, with the 40% general, goes to the city general fund, 60% stays in parking, is that correct?
Correct.
So when some of the funds in the reserves come back to the city, obviously that's helpful. I know that doesn't count for the 40-60 split. Yeah, I'm just, yeah, I understand. You made the great point about always trying to find ways to save. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just also feel like we're tasked with finding ways to collect more funds that isn't raising someone's taxes or raising a fee, you know, when
Definitely.
we have these other opportunities, especially when, you know, when we're booting cars, oftentimes it's because someone's really taking advantage of the city and the situation, you know, so.
Yep.
And that's such an important thing to my residents. All right, I will
Yeah.
yield my time. Thank you so much for letting me go first. I appreciate it, Treasurer Lane.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Going back in order of seniority, Alderwoman Boyd.
Yes, I guess I'm kind of confused. I'm kind of confused because I'm hearing you say you all are looking to purchase 2 tow trucks, am I correct?
No.
No, that, Alderwoman, that was from, so in 2021, when we had the pandemic, and we passed that board bill to transfer some of the reserve funds from the treasurer's office to the city of St. Louis. This is what we spent those funds on.
And so that was for the tow lot?
That was for the tow trucks, the
For the
NSOs.
streets department.
That's, okay, that's what I'm trying to get clarity. So I'm hearing you say that you all have communication, and I think that's the most dangerous word in our city because that doesn't happen. So you saying you have communication with the tow lot in regards to the derelict cars. So you all are communicating, your people are communicating with the tow lot about derelict cars. That's what I'm hearing.
I said we communicate ongoingly with the streets department,
That's
who
the
runs the
tow lot,
tow
yeah, that's all
division.
right.
Yes, to
Yeah.
make sure that we're in sync with parking enforcement and what they're doing from the street side on parking.
So who's communicating with the police?
We do as well. So we communicate with the officers, because officers, you know, what a lot of people don't know is sometimes police officers will write tickets. So they write their tickets, they have blue tickets, we have green ones. So they write tickets, they send those over to us, and we integrate them into our system. So when there's a derelict car, we get calls, we communicate with the police officers. They get calls, they communicate with us in parking. And then we make sure that we're staying in communication, the three of us, between the parking division, between the streets department, and between our police department.
Okay, it's a breakdown somewhere. I'm just letting you know. It's somewhere,
And
it's a
there's-
breakdown.
and the-
Because the reason why I'm saying this, I can think of 2 examples. The police were called about the derelict car. Your staff ticketed the car. Then the police came and put the green sticker on the car. A year later, the car's still there. So that's why I'm like, it's a breakdown somewhere. So I don't know if you all can come up with a better communication piece, because when residents call and say, Well, Alderwoman, we did what you told us to do, and then I talked to traffic enforcement continuously, and so they're very cordial. But the challenge is, it's a breakdown, because if the car is still sitting there a year later, that's telling me it's something wrong. And that's what I'm trying to get the understanding. I do
Sure, so-
understand, wait a minute, I do understand we are trying to help people that can't pay tickets and blah, blah, blah. I get that. But as you said previously, you have people that abuse the law. And they know that their cars are illegal, and they know the cars are just sitting there for months and years at a time. So I'm just trying to figure out, is it a way you all could come up with a better communication, you know what I'm saying, or towing or something with that?
So I guess I would disagree in that the communication isn't there, because like you said, if police call us and we ticket it, I think that's our, that's our part. And then it's not the police, but the streets department does put the green sticker on it, which marks it for being towed. But like we were saying with, like Alderman Schweitzer and I were just talking about, it's one of the biggest issues is our tow lot is full. So there are cars, there are a lot of cars that are slated to be towed, but the tow lot is full, so there's no place for the tow department to bring the cars. I'm sure you all are familiar with the Kia break-ins and everything like that. There are a lot of Kias, the tow lot will let you know, there are a lot of Kias in there, and they do have their auctions to kind of clear out the tow lot, but no one's buying a Kia that's been broken into and then brought into the tow lot, and people aren't coming to claim those cars. So it's full of cars. So it's not that no one knows that these cars are out there, or that the tow lot doesn't know that these cars are out there or tagged for tow. It's just that they really just don't have anywhere to put them right now.
Okay, I respectfully disagree, but that's fine. If that's what you think, that's fine. You have a right to your opinion, so I don't agree with that. And so I'm just saying, I think it's a breakdown somewhere. That's where I'm at with that. So on the tickets, I know you all was doing, if somebody got a ticket, they didn't pay the ticket in a reasonable time, the ticket was doubled, is that still happening?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So have you had an increase since the tickets get doubled? Have you had an increase in people paying tickets?
Since they've been doubled?
Since you doubled the price, so because I think the thinking was, if you double it, then people will be more apt to pay the tickets quicker. So is that happening? Have you had people paying the tickets faster to keep from paying that double fine?
Well, ticket fines increasing after a certain amount of time is not new. That's the way they always have been.
No, I get that, but have you had an increase in people paying the tickets? That's what I'm trying to find out. Has the number increased from when it wasn't double?
I guess I don't really get the question.
Okay, I get a ticket.
Yes.
In 7 days, the ticket is $10. In 7 days, I don't pay the ticket, so now it's $20. Before that happened, the ticket might linger and I don't pay the ticket right away. But since the double fine, I'ma hurry up, meet Joe Blow resident and say, okay, let me hurry and pay this ticket because I don't want to pay the double fine. So have you did a cost comparison on how many tickets were paid prior this to now since the double? I'd be curious to know, because it seemed like people would pay tickets quicker because they don't want the double fine.
So the rate at which people pay tickets has not really changed at all.
Okay.
But the doubling, I guess that's the part this isn't new that we're.
No,
that
I know
tickets
it's not
double.
new. I was just curious if you had it.
I guess what you're
Yeah, they
asking
had
is, what is the
increased.
percentage of people that pay tickets when they're initially, the percentage of people who get tickets, how many people pay tickets when it's just at the base amount versus how many people pay tickets after the doubling amount and then
Right.
after the tripling amount?
Right, right. And I forgot all about the tripling amount, so that's a whole nother data, say, okay, so how is that working? I'm just trying to figure out, was it a win-win for the department to make it where it doubled and tripled? That's what I was trying to see. Am I making sense?
You are. I guess I'm just trying to figure out where the flashpoint was where you think that changed.
Okay, say, because I knew when it happened, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago it happened.
So ticket prices increased, but they were always, so it's just by states, like that's just how they work. So it starts at 20 for, all municipalities. So it starts at 20 after 45 days because it is a, parking citation, it does go up and then it, continues to go up. But that's just what happens. So we never made a change in that. That's just how it's always been. But we can get you data on how many people in a given year pay a ticket at the base level versus make a payment at the double level versus make a payment at the triple level. But since tickets have been issued, they've always been under that rule of after so many days it's late and then it goes up. After so many more days it's late, it goes up.
Okay, I get that. I'm just, because I'm a numbers-driven person when something like that happens, so I'm looking at, you all you started that process on the doubling some years ago. That's what I'm hearing.
No, it's always been like that since tickets have been being issued.
Okay, and so I guess my question is, let me bring clarity. So my question is, after the pandemic, how much did that change where people paid those tickets?
So a lot of people didn't have money to pay. So during the pandemic, we just saw a drop in everything.
Right.
So we saw a drop in people's ability to pay because,
Right.
The economy was uncertain, their jobs were uncertain. So people weren't paying anything. I think the water division, if they've presented to you all already, talked about how they even had to get or sought revenue replacement funds because people weren't able to pay their water bills and things like that. So in addition to parking tickets, if it's not on their hierarchy of things that need to be paid for when you're losing money and in a rising cost environment, parking tickets were not on the high list of things that were paid during the pandemic.
So my question again is, do you all have a data system that you all track to see the change after the pandemic? Because I know everybody uses the pandemic as why things didn't happen. So, okay, now we're over a year after the pandemic. So do you all have a method to say, since that, this is the increase, or this is the below average that people were paying, or whatever?
Yep, you can
Okay.
see it reflected in our budget on page 5.
Okay.
So with the parking tickets and parking meters. So it's come back up to, or we projected it to be at our normal levels. It did drop during the pandemic, went right back up.
Okay.
But one of the things that we like to do is, because we are human beings and we understand we're working with human beings, we like to infuse a level of equity into it. And that's why during the pandemic, like I was saying before, we want people to pay their bills and we want to be able to enforce the law, but we want to be able to do that in an equitable way and show that we have a heart. So that's when I instituted the Parking and Towing Assistance Program. So like you said, or like we were talking about, the fees do double and triple, and then they stop there. But what we were able to do is say, hey, we understand that it's a hard time right now. We understand that a lot of people are going through a lot of things. We have a program that we're instituting, and I wish actually more fee offices would institute a payment program as well, where we freeze the fees. So it will no longer go up, no longer double, no longer triple, as long as they're on a monthly payment plan. And that starts as low as $15 a month.
And so when will that program go into effect?
That started in 2020
2020, okay,
and still going today.
okay. And so what success rate do you have with that one?
So far, everyone that's been in the program, we probably have like an 89% success rate. And even that 11% that's quote unquote unsuccessful, we're working on that too. So it's not that they don't make the payments, but we're instituting a system where they can do auto debit. So right now, the 11%, most of them, it's just because they forgot to make a payment. So they just get right back on the plan though.
Okay.
And then we also, in addition to the parking and towing assistance program, we do events a few times a year. So we just did one this past Saturday where I was sitting at a table, and we do parking forgiveness. So we actually forgave upwards of $3,000 in fines and fees for people just this weekend, and we'll be doing it again in October. But we've been doing that for a long time.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Alderwoman Saunier?
I guess first, I know yesterday you guys, was it yesterday or was it Saturday? Benton Park?
Saturday, yeah.
Okay, yes, so Saturday, I got a couple of good conversations from constituents who were able to get some parking expenses forgiven. So thank you for that service.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
I really don't think that I have any other questions except for maybe just about that. Like, do you guys have a schedule of events or anything that we can see for when those are like coming so that I can make sure I'm letting my constituents know when they can go and get that service?
Yeah, so so this event that just passed and the one that they're anticipating for October, we're done through the Department of Health. So once we know, we'll make sure we send it out to the entire Board of Aldermen as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
so we're anticipating the next time being October. With us resuming booting and towing, we're going to have internal conversations about having another event during that time. Because again, we want to be equitable in our booting, towing enforcement, and hopefully as capacity opens up at the tow lot, be able to get focus more on the derelict cars that are, no one's coming for these, getting those off the street before we just boot and tow people who have tickets but are still trying to get to work and do things like that. So we're looking to do another one at that point. So hopefully over the next 2 months, do one so that we can continue to help reduce those fines and fees. A lot of times what we'll do and what we did this weekend as well is, people understand and people come up to the table and they say, yep, I got the ticket. I know I got the ticket. But then it doubles and triples. So a lot of what we did this weekend, we set up to 100, but we were able to do some things where someone might have had a $380 balance just because it was fines and fees, but the actual tickets amounted to $60. So instead of just doing 100, we said, we're going to cut the fees off and get you down to just the base ticket price, and you can pay the original ticket price. So we'll be doing that hopefully over the next 2 months. Well, definitely over the next 2 months, and then again in October.
Yeah, I would definitely love to see that because obviously I understand what Alderwoman Schweitzer was saying earlier about, revenue and things, but also I want people to be able to drive their cars and get to where they need to go. And I know there's quite a few folks with some fees out there, especially once we waived it from the pandemic.
Right, same. And if there are ways that in your wards we can infuse into what you're doing, because I know the Department of Health event was in Benton Park. We did it last year at O'Fallon Park or Fairgrounds Park. So we know that everyone can't get everywhere. So if there are things that you all are doing, if it's a town hall, if it's a community event where we can be present at and do that as hopefully an incentive to get people in your neighborhoods out there to learn about the great work that you all are doing. And get their voices heard, we can also supplement and provide some ticket and fine forgiveness too. We'd love to do it.
Thank you. I'll call you about the next town hall. That concludes my questioning.
Thank you.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to second what Alderwoman Saunier said about, of course, we want to generate money, but we don't want to just be towing people cars because they are in poverty. I like the fact that your office is going from $17 to $15. I do got some questions just about, I see that the Keel Garage has probably one of the ones that has the most kind of like upgrades. What ideally are some of those upgrades? I know in 23, it's a large amount, 24, just was curious, like a generic, maybe like that garage looks like it get a little bit more loving, maybe because the blues is there or something. But I was just curious of some of the repairs and replacement at the Keel. And if you don't have that right now, you can always get that to me.
Yeah, I don't have the exact ones. My facilities guy's not here with me, but yeah, we can provide those to you. It's not, so even if you look at, I'm going to assume, you're looking at slide 4, or page 4?
Yeah.
So some of them are, so it's not because, one's getting more love than another, but it really just depends on the year. So all of these garages are built in different years, so the maintenance required at different years it's just different. So like, with your car, if every 3 years you have to, flush your transmission. That's a big cost, but it's just happens to be in year 3. So that's what we're looking at some of these garages. But the specific things that we're doing in those garages, I can get a list of what's scheduled, the scheduled repair and replace line items, and get that to this group.
Okay.
So you can see kinda-
Meter upgrade to 4G, is that just like the current meters we already got, just replacing the ones that's probably not debit card friendly to debit card friendly now?
Yes, and
Or is it like
it's
you could do-
updating the internet connectivity as well.
Gotcha.
So yeah, yeah, and it's the same. The cost actually would be astronomically higher, but we're not replacing the whole unit, just the computer hardware inside.
Gotcha. Will the endless cash be a fee? Like if I, instead of like you say, instead of paying cash, making sure workers are safe if you go to a game, if I use a debit card, will there be like a 2% fee for that endless cash?
Transaction fees?
Yeah.
So right now, and again, as another, Alderman Schwartz was saying, as another thing that we kind of eat the cost for, we actually do eat the cost for transaction fees right now.
Okay. I'm sure Alderwoman Spencer and myself would love to appreciate you and your staff making that lot security measure. I know we will be looking to do something similar to that to all the parking lots across the city. So the fact that your office is already getting on it, really appreciate that. And I'm sure we'd love to sit down and talk with you in the near future about that. Lastly, I'm not a fan of the boot process and it coming back. I want to go on record with that. And the question is, if we start that process again and the tow lot is full.
How does it work?
Yeah.
Good question. So again, and it's, I will clarify, I think, well, at least in my opinion, that communication is a good thing. It helps us to talk and be able to resolve problems as opposed to being in silos. But with the tow lot, that's what we're talking about. So we can't, if we operate in a silo, we'll say, all right, we're booting and towing. There are, let's say, 1,300 cars on the boot list, and now there are a bunch of cars with, the 1,300 cars with boots and green stickers on them, and we have nowhere to put them. So that doesn't really help us push or drive forward what we want, which is, one, getting the most important cars, the derelict vehicles, off the roads, and it doesn't help us generate that revenue at the tow lot. So knowing what their capacity is, and we've had those conversations, so when we sat down, we were looking at probably about 20 cars a week. And when we wanted to start with these 20 cars, we have to think, well, if it's currently full, which is, again, is what they let us know. They have their numbers, their rosters, and what their capacity is. If it's currently full or at max capacity, what is the number of cars that make sense? And then also what's going out from cars that are being sold at auction and cars that aren't being sold at auction. So we had that initial conversation. We're going to have more conversations with them because, again, just to frame it up, if the tow lot is at 98% capacity and we still tow 20 cars a week, but those are only 20 derelict cars, and cars that are not in good shape and should probably go somewhere else and not up for auction, then that's continuing to decrease that capacity. But if we have cars that are probably going to be sold at auction, but also are not, ticket amounts, because we have the list and we maintain those metrics. So we know there are cars out there that, there are Maseratis and Ferraris out there with $8,000 in parking tickets of people who just don't want to pay it. But I'm sure if that winds up in a tow lot, that won't last that long at auction. So things like that. So just being more creative about and coming to the table with the great minds that we have here at the city to say, how can we make this work with the resources that we have and make this as effective as possible? So like you said, it's not good for poor people to be towed and now they have no way to get to work, but knowing that, what people will complain about, again, those derelict vehicles, probably those plates that they can pay or have the ability to pay, but, they're just not paying because, right now they're not going to get booted and towed, so what's their incentive? And then also, so not towing people who have, $200 in tickets or booting them, especially when it's not like we don't have the capacity to do that anyway. So being smarter, I think we can always be smart as a city, and we have smart people here, so we are working with them and communicating to make sure that we come to the table around real solutions. And once we have a good plan moving forward, which I think we'll have soon, be able to share that with this group if you all want.
Yeah. And I know even though I'm not a fan of the boots, I do appreciate your office at least having kind of that amnesty program, not just for tickets, for tickets, but will help people not kind of get booted. Lastly, I also would kind of love that data that Alderwoman Boyd talked about to see where, after the first set of tickets, do people pay after the second or third? I mean, ideally, I would think that, like you say, parking's not the one thing they're going to take care of. They like trash bills. So probably to see, I'm sure when they probably get to that triple stage, how we can be a help to, like you say, I know city always want to generate some money, but how can we look at those ones in those high tiers that have all these fees, and the original ticket was $60, but now it's 300 some bucks. Of course, I'm not going to pay it. I'm not going to say I wouldn't pay it. I probably financially can't pay it from $60 to $300. And then one more quick thing, I would say be looking out probably in June to be working to do another all hands on deck, because I'm reaching out to Dr. Monty so we can do something like that, and would love to have the treasurer's office there to do some amnesty around tickets.
That'll be perfect timing.
Thank you, Alderman Aldrich. Just a few things, Treasurer. I have to echo, I think nobody wants to see us charging and feeing our residents unnecessarily, and certainly parking tickets can spiral. But at the end of the day, parking is a very lucrative business. We have a lot of rich guys who own parking lots downtown, which Alderman Aldrich and I will be reining in here certainly, but it is certainly a very lucrative business to be in, even with the infrastructure and all the things that come along with it. And the parking division does generate $21 million worth of revenue per year. And I want to offer a point of clarification on the transfer that went to the general fund during the pandemic, because the reserve fund is quite healthy. Looking at 2020, a reserve fund of $15 million for an office that generates $20 million, that's almost it's about 3/4 of a year of operating budget and reserves. To give you some perspective, the city of St. Louis has about a month of operating budget, maybe, and that's only new for the last couple of years when we've really been focusing on shoring up those reserves. So it's an office that really enjoys the opportunity to generate a ton of revenue by those parking tickets and by charging to park at these facilities, and so therefore, the revenue, considering the $21 million of revenue that we generate, it's really a lot of money. That revenue sharing with the city of St. Louis being less than $1 million of that. So last year we're looking at $470,000 of the $17 million generated. It's a very small percentage that actually comes over to the general fund. And as a city, we have so many unmet needs for our citizens, and every dollar makes a difference in being able to provide health resources, STD testing, any number of things that the city needs to do. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just go through some of the expenses that your offices has. In particular, I see the personnel is $8 million. But the contracts and other services and the non-operating expenses make up over $10 million of the revenues. So if you could help us understand what it is that the parking division is contracting out, I think it would be helpful.
Sure, can definitely do that. One thing I want to make as a point of clarification too, I know you did talk about the 19 million in revenue. I think it's important to also know that it's not just, there's a difference between revenue and profit. So we have to do our revenues less our expenses. And that is not 20, that is not 20 million. So, the 500,000 million here and there is 40% of the revenues, 40% of the profits that we bring in, not necessarily the revenues, again, because we have to pay for our own costs. In terms of you said the contractual services, is that the one that you wanted to discuss?
Well, yeah, on your point, the city of St. Louis brings in, a little over $1 billion a year, and we spend every single penny returning it in services to our city. So I understand there's a cost of doing business, certainly, but if you could help us understand what it is we're paying for out of the revenue we're generating on our streets. So
Absolutely.
Contracts and the non-operating, because they make up over $10 million of your revenue, it would be helpful to understand what those are for. Like how much
our-
of, how much of the, how
10
much of?
million of our expenses.
So like, are we doing, we have a contract for $6 million and we have $8 million in personnel. So are we contracting out parking enforcement? What are we contracting out from the parking division is what I'm trying to get at.
Sure. So there are many costs to parking and parking enforcement. There's also more operations than the average person sees. So from the direct citizen contact, you'll see a parking enforcement officer. So obviously we're paying for the salaries of our PEOs. So we do the ticket writing. So with parking, there's ticket writing. And then there's the enforcement side. We also have contracts for our software. So part of the software we don't own, but we have to manage that software. So our AIM system, which allows us to track all that data that you were talking about, Alderman Boyd. So to be able to track that data that we get from the parking services, knowing what meters are up, what meters are down, what meters need repair, all of that is wrapped up in the contractual services. So meter maintenance is in there as well, which is, service contracts are really, really big. I mean, if you look at, just to compare it to, what's that thing called? Electric vehicle charging stations. One of the biggest things, I was at a parking conference just last month, and one of the biggest things is the service contracts. Not having those in place, one out of every two electric vehicle charging stations in the city of Los Angeles are down now because they don't have adequate service contracts. So we want to make sure that we don't have that, because like you all are saying, if we don't have working meters, we can't generate that revenue to go back to the city. So part of that, a big part of that are those contractual services. Technology gets old. It has to get outdated. It gets old, and we have to replace that. So that's also in there as well. And then part of those tech upgrades that I talked about. So making sure that we have the cashless pay option, making sure that we can operate things like our parking and towing assistance program via AIMS, or AIMS is the software that we use. We also have the single space meters and the multi-space meters, so we have contracts for those as well as the replacement of those meters when they get old and outdated. So all of that wraps up in there.
So we have $8 million going to the meter maids, or the meter people, I should say, that are
Parking enforcement officers.
parking enforcement officers. And then we're paying $6.5 million in contracts just for the technology and the meter upgrades.
For technology, meter upgrades, the service contracts, and the operating contracts on the back end. So our parking enforcement officers write tickets. So they go out on the street every single day. They look for cars, they check the meters, they write tickets. That is just one aspect. Writing tickets doesn't get you, writing tickets alone.
So if we're generating $19 million in revenue, $6.5 million of it is going into technology and the sort of back end. I mean, that's like a third of the revenue is going into just the meter technology. I'm just finding that.
And servicing.
Okay, it's just an enormous percentage of the overall operating budget. And so it would be helpful, I know we've talked a lot about the Hudson contract, for example. I've never gotten any clarity on what that contract is actually, what the performance is, what they're actually doing. And it's very frustrating to me to see $6.5 million for a contract is an enormous amount of funds. And it's literally a third of your budget. So understanding what it is we're contracting out. One of the issues I have, you mentioned siloing, like the lack of communication. It's very unusual to have parking outside of the city purview. And so since you have the autonomy there, we don't get a lot of clarity on what those contracts are for, and we are dying for every dollar to be spent into potholes. We were arguing the other day about an extra $400,000 just for pothole, materials that we don't have in our budget to fill. And, this is an office that generates an enormous amount of money on our streets, which are in very, very poor condition. And I would argue that every dollar that we generate on it should go back into the streets that our citizens need to drive on. So if you could provide some clarity on what the metrics of those contracts are, it'd be very, very helpful, because.
Can do. So we actually have before the Supreme Court ruling change, a parking division, our parking commission. So we had monthly meetings for our parking commission. That parking commission was comprised of the director of streets, Myself, our parking administrator, as well as the chair of the, I guess, old Streets Committee. So during those meetings, we discuss all the contracts. Our budget is submitted, so in terms of, authority or autonomy, our parking budget is submitted for review every single year, or had been before this previous board, to the Streets Department. It will now be a different department. So there's transparency in what we provide and what we offer. So it's not just done, behind closed doors and no one ever sees the parking division or the contracts. Actually, all the contracts have to be approved by the parking commission, or had to be approved by the parking commission up until this current year. So those things did happen. Just for clarity. But again, in terms of those contracts and the services, if you all would love to take a tour of the parking division and what Hudson provides, I've done it myself a number of times, especially when I first joined in 2021, and they run an amazing operation. And we can take you through, the day in the life of parking and show you everything that happens. But like I said, the parking enforcement and the ticket writing, that's just one piece. That's the initial piece. That's mostly what people see. But those tickets have to be processed. So that goes into our back-end system, which I keep saying is our AIM system. So that populates everything. And then from there, when you go to our Parking Violations Bureau, that's over there on 7th Street. So you walk into our building. That's where people will go to either pay a ticket or, like I said, because we want to be fair, dispute a ticket. We understand technology is not perfect and people aren't perfect. So sometimes there are tickets where it's like, I think I got this for the wrong reason, and we have a disputes office. So part of those contracts too are we have to use adjudicators and judges to be able to dispute those tickets. So we pay for 3 adjudicators, which are also part of the contract, so that citizens in the city of St. Louis have a voice and be able to say, hey, you know what, I don't think I rightfully got this ticket. I want to dispute it, and we have a process for that. That Parking Violations Bureau, there are not parking enforcement officers, or as you said, there are not meter maids inside the office that are disputing those tickets. It is the parking violation staff and Hudson staff that are there. So we have 3 people in that office to be able to get those people. As you can see, we write a lot of tickets. So there are a lot of people who either come in to pay, come in to get on a payment plan, and that servicing is done at that office. There's also a warehouse. So we have 1,800 meters and pay stations in the city. So those have to go somewhere, and we have to have backups because we don't want one meter goes out and the actual whole pay station or the entire meter has to leave, and now we have to wait to order a new one. So we have backups that are stored, and like I said, if we do this tour, we can go see where they are, immaculately kept. So these are meters that we have on backup, so those have to be stored, again, maintained. We have meter collections. Our parking enforcement officers, because some people still put cash and coin.
But if I may, are all those functions you're talking about right now under contracts?
Yes.
Why are we handling the storage of parking meters with a private contractor instead of in-house with our personnel?
With our personnel? With
Our
personnel.
city employees?
Well, we would just have to hire them, so that would be more staff for us to hire, more building space for us to
Well, I mean,
acquire
as a
well.
public, when we talk about privatizing services of our city, it's just a huge amount of your budget which has been privatized and is handled outside of public employees. What is the non-operating, the $4 million that goes into non-operating?
The $4 million that goes into non-operating, that's our debt service. So paying our debt is not operating expenses,
Okay.
so that's debt service.
So are the contracts and other services, are those services that just go for parking tickets, or are they also part of the parking facilities, like the Keel, the parking garages? Or are they just part of those meter
That'll go into
reads?
there too.
They're there too, okay.
Again, part of that, yes.
Okay.
So yes.
So, but again, I just want to come back to the fact that 1/3 of every dollar that we're generating goes to a private contractor to do something on the back end with the tickets. And so that's just, it is very tough to get into a situation where you have a $300 parking fee, or you have these enormous amounts of money we're paying to the parking division. And so much of the function of the parking division is handled outside of city services with private contractors. And for me, I know they used to go through a parking commission, but I still have no idea what those contractors are doing. And I would love to have a tour of the Hudson facility, because I still, after asking questions after question after question over many years, still have no idea what they actually do. And it's just millions of dollars. I just know for many years, being down here, harping on the fact that we have a full tow lot, which is part of parking enforcement. We have.
It's not.
Towing vehicles is the end of the line for parking. Booting and towing, it's not part of your parking enforcement, but it's part of a system of enforcing parking and cars on our street. In a robust system of a city government that would not be siloed into these various departments, we would be operating as one. And there wouldn't be this breakdown in communication because we would have a city that is integrated with these functions together. When you fail to park appropriately, you get a ticket from one entity, and then you get a sticker from another entity, and then it's an entirely different entity that may be towing your vehicle. It's a completely ridiculous siloing of governmental functions, and in my opinion, it would best function if it was under one entity, and then we could take care of our streets with the revenue generated on them, and we would be not siloing the communication, but working together. And you pointed out earlier that towing vehicles is not a revenue generator for your office. Well, it is a revenue generator from our city, and it's a safety measure for our city. And in a perfectly functioning city, or a better functioning city, in my opinion, those services, those functions would be integrated together and not be siloed. And so we would not have the issue, well, towing just isn't a revenue generator for me. Well, the fourth ticket, get it out of here, because it's clogging up our street, and the people that live in these neighborhoods where these stolen vehicles are deposited on a regular basis, I've represented them. It is just absolutely degrading to a community to have your street littered with stolen, abandoned vehicles. And you can give them tickets, but the communication isn't happening to the city departments that are actually under city purview. With that being said, I mean, there is $20 million of revenue being generated from this office, and less than $1 million of it going back into the general fund. If we could talk just a little bit, I know your flagship program we talked about earlier, I know that while the city has under its purview providing all these like civil services and social benefits, including a health department and figuring out how to fund all these things, you all do participate in financial empowerment, which is so important, especially as you mentioned earlier, all the payday lending and the predatory banking that happens within our communities. And number two, the college savings fund. When we passed those measures in 2015, I was down here, and it was very clearly presented and passed with the intention of having private investors fund that instead of parking revenues. Can you talk a little bit about that flagship program as it pertains to its funding sources and its effectiveness? I know I've shared with your office several complaints from members of the community that those bank accounts aren't being authorized by parents, and that they're not in every single school. So if you could maybe address some of those, or if you want, we could.
I have a question about it looks like you're switching to college savings. I had a question about the parking, so.
Oh, sure.
I'm just curious, when did we switch to Hudson? Do you know when?
I don't know. When, you know what year that was?
Well.
I think it was 4 years ago, right?
Yeah. And there was a savings annually of about $2 to $3 million from switching.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Yes,
What was
yep.
the reason for switching to that?
Cost savings and honestly better quality product.
And you said we saved how much? From
About $2 to $3 million. We save about $2 to $3 million a year from that.
Okay.
It's a different contract. They do different things than what it was previous, and they're charging the city in a different manner. So like, for example, during the pandemic, the previous contract was a pay-per-ticket service, and under the Hudson contract, it was an annual fee, and we didn't issue tickets during the pandemic. So I think the whole conversation is it's very, very complicated and nuanced. But at the end of the day, the contracts for a city department being a third of its budget is very unusual, And it's just something that I think we could all benefit from some additional clarity on.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so that, yeah, to answer your question, same services, so it's, yeah, I don't, in my opinion,
What are
not
the
that
services,
complicated.
Treasurer Lane?
I listed them already, so I can list them again if you want me to.
That's the back end, the meter,
Servicing, maintenance, ordering it, upgrades, tracking data to know which ones are online, offline, processing tickets,
For
being
me,
able to
as a
send
new
out.
member, I just wanted to know what was the reason for, if we had this contract one way, we did it one way, what was the reason for switching, and what were the, yeah, so that's why I was asking.
If you want to, go ahead.
Just briefly, I was on this board, of course, several years ago when Larry Williams had the City of St. Louis treasurer, and he came to the Ways and Means Committee to let us know that he was just really disbanding the city employees that collected the money out of the meters. And they had a breakdown of the savings by just contracting out to, a company so they can collect the meters. And not only that, it was the technology and the constant upgrades that you have to make dealing with a lot of the meter technology and equipment. So in the long run, it really was a saving. Now, we jumped up and down on Ways and Means. We didn't want him to do that. We wanted him to keep the city employees. We really had a fit about it. But long story short, what happened was he went to the state of Missouri and got the bill passed because this is a county office, and that's what happened.
Can you
So,
introduce
it was a savings.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, Frank Williamson. I'm director of Off Street Park with the City of St. Louis. You're right. I apologize. So I just wanted to interject that to let you know it really was a savings. Not only that, a lot of the employees would sue or file grievances because bad back or they would hurt their foot or arm doing the collection. So it was really a savings with the City of St. Louis and our department when they contracted it out. And then, like I said, with the constant upgrade of technology, it really helped this department in the long haul. So that's all.
Well, I don't think anybody would argue that the treasurer's office under Larry Williams was functioning at the optimal level. There were so many issues, and when Treasurer Jones was elected to that position, she really cleaned up a lot of the ghost employees and a lot of other things that were going on at that time that were really quite despicable. That being said, again, I just want to reiterate that the enormous amount of money you generate, the very small amount that we get for the general fund, we are really struggling to find an extra $400,000 for pothole repair supplies. And, all these, the majority, or at least half of the revenue that you generate is on the streets, and the streets of our city right now are in deplorable condition. And we are really fighting for every dollar that we could get. And you have an enormous amount of reserves compared to your operating budget when you compare that to the city as a whole, and the amount of social programming and the social benefit that you are charged to provide the citizens is very small compared to the city as a whole. And we have a duty to find those revenue sources and put them to the highest best use. I want to also respect the fact that our airport director is here and has been waiting patiently for 45 minutes. And with that, I think what we'll do, Treasurer, if you don't mind, first of all, I want to commend you for coming here because you didn't have to present this parking budget to us. This was a request on the part of the committee as an informational piece. So I thank you for coming before us to do that. And I will ask that maybe in follow-up, we could do a couple things. Follow up on Alderwoman Boyd's request on those parking tickets. And as Alderman Aldrich pointed out, kind of how they go from the first to the second to the third, just so we have an understanding of how folks are able or unable to pay those parking tickets. Number two, if you don't mind, I know there's been some level of clarity on those contracts. I would appreciate that in written form. I just haven't seen it. My apologies. I've seen some of the contracts, but I still don't understand how we have to spend such an enormous amount of money on those outside contractors to provide the back end of parking support. And lastly, We didn't get to go into it, but I know that you're very proud of the flagship program on the college savings accounts. But as I've mentioned, have some questions from members of the general public about the number of accounts that are actually sanctioned by parents, opened, and have those kind of like savings going into them, as well as the interest that is being generated from those accounts, where they're going, because I know that the interest generated on all those college savings accounts don't go to the children or the college savings accounts. Those are non-interest-bearing accounts, as far as I understand. So that's a revenue generator for the office, and I'm curious where that
It is
interest
not.
goes.
So that interest that's collected, it stays within the incentive account, and that goes back to kids. So it.
But it
grows
doesn't
the-
go to the individual kids, right? So if a kid opens up a
It
college,
does.
they're now interest-bearing accounts?
No, the account is not interest-bearing. The incentive account that we hold is interest-bearing so that it can grow the incentive dollars that we offer to kids through the program.
Okay.
But we can talk about that when you.
Maybe,
if you
just in
schedule.
interest of the director
sure.
of airports, maybe we could either come back for that or have some clarity on that, because I know there's been a lot of conversation in some of the parent, in some of the schools about a lack of interest, ability to grow interest for their kids, and a lack of of those accounts. It's my understanding that a very small percentage of them are engaged with the kids and the families, and that's of concern to me when we're putting a large amount of money into those accounts. We can come back to it. I want to make sure that we're
And if
giving
you
the
want,
director.
I can bring some of our parents too to speak to you directly if you'd like to ask them questions.
I think the question would be as a general sense, because I
Okay,
think,
sure.
individual, anecdotally, there's been a lot of questions about the accounts from individuals, and rather than talk about those, we can maybe just talk about the program as a whole, because I think it would be very helpful. But Treasurer, again, you spent a lot of time with us today going over things that you didn't necessarily need to. I really appreciate it, and the added level of transparency is very appreciated by myself, and I believe the entire Budget and Public Employees Committee.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and now the second item on our budget would be, or excuse me, on our budget committee hearing today is another enterprise fund, our airport. And so Director Hamnabergy, if you don't mind. Well, we can, yes.
You want to take a break? Oh, did you want to?
I think we'll be okay, yeah. And Director, do you mind? Okay. Yeah, maybe we will take a 2-minute break, yeah. You've already spent here with us, so, yeah.
Well, good morning, members of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you for having us here. Pardon, budget here.
Our budget and public employees.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah, of course.
Get the titles wrong, but thank you for having us here this morning. As you probably know, we have a lot going on at the airport, and so we think it's going to be a really exciting year for us, and we're excited to present the budget. Some of those things are in the budget. Obviously, there's other things going on that aren't part of this year's budget. But with that, I'm going to have Antonio Strong, who is our Deputy Director for Finance and Administration, also a CPA. And Antonio's going to present the budget. We'll both be here to answer any questions that you may have relative to the budget or anything outside the budget as well.
And Director, do you mind explaining just kind of briefly how the airport fund works, the oversight the Board of Aldermen play, the role we play, the role the city has in the relationship in a general sense?
Sure. So we have an airport commission, which is a 17-person commission that has, of those 17 people, by default, we have the comptroller, the president of the Board of Aldermen, and the chairperson for Transportation and Commerce. That's been Alderman Cone the last couple of years and will be Alderman Cone, at least from my understanding, as we move forward. That commission also has appointees by the mayor, appointees by St. Charles County, one from St. Charles, one from St. Clair County, and then 5 from St. Louis County, and the mayor has 6. So that's the 17-person board. So we have an airport commission. The first thing we do on our budget process is actually, our airlines are our partners. They fund the airport. So we have a very close working relationship with all of our airport partners and all of our airlines. So we work on them with the budget, and then we bring it to the Airport Commission, and other items, whether those are ordinances, whether those are contracts, all of those things go through the Airport Commission first. That's always the first Wednesday of every month. And then, of course, we have things that require either the ENA and/or ENA and Board of Aldermen through the Transportation and Commerce. So we have a pretty lengthy legislative process for all of our items. So on the particular budget, as I said, it'll go to Airport Commission, and then it also comes here to the Board of Aldermen, rolled up in the larger package. As an enterprise fund, we do have a percentage of our budget that also comes back to the general fund. We'll talk about that in the presentation as well. That is normally not allowed for airports, but in this particular case, we are one of the grandfathered airports that does have that. So does that answer your question in terms of how we operate? Obviously, we work very closely with Transportation and Commerce. I know some of you are on the Transportation and Commerce Committee so we work very closely with them on our items, and then through that are always available for any questions that any Board of Aldermen has.
But we don't authorize your budget here with our general operating budget, but we have some oversight with regards to specific things within.
That's correct. So it is authorized, again, with our airline partners first and through the commission, and then it's rolled up into the broader package through the city's budget, but there's not an authorization that we've ever had through this particular committee.
Thank you.
But we're happy to present and answer any questions that you may have.
Good afternoon, distinguished board members. My name is Antonio Strong. I'm the Deputy Director of Finance and Administration, and so we put together this presentation for you. This is kind of the same presentation that we presented to our airport commissioners in April. It just has been updated a little bit to provide you a little bit more background how the airport operates. As the director mentioned, we're an enterprise fund, so we do not derive any revenues from taxing the citizens of St. Louis. All of our revenue is derived from people who use the airport, such as our airlines, our concessionaires, tenants. All of those individuals help operate the airport. So on this first page, this shows the variances between where we forecast to end for revenue for fiscal year 23 versus what we have put together for our fiscal year 24 budget. So our overall budget, I'll just go to the final number, total airport revenues that we expect for fiscal year 24 is $213 million. That is not in this presentation, but in your binders, I understand that you received from the budget division, you have a page that shows you the total airport revenues, and it shows you by line item the different revenue types. So the first revenue type that we obtain from the airlines are called landing fees. So we charge a landing fee for every airline or every plane that touches our airfield. So we charge a landing fee of $5.60 per 1,000 pounds. So we anticipate total landing fee revenues broken out by signatory airlines and broken out by other airlines that do not sign our signatory agreement. We do anticipate about $56.9 million in landing fee revenue from our airlines. Now, that is a 12% and 18% increase over the prior year, and that is due to, we're coming out of the pandemic. Our banner year for revenues was in 2019. Prior to the pandemic, we were expecting a growth activity and revenues that was unprecedented, that we've never seen before. And that was across the entire nation. Like in every airport in the aviation industry, 2019 was a banner year for revenue growth in the industry. And then the pandemic hit, we saw a dip in those revenues. That is getting back to that 2019 level, and we do expect to be back closer to that 2019 level in fiscal year 24. Not full recovery, but we do expect to be back towards that fiscal year 19 level. Our rent, so we charge a rental fee to our airport partners too. Terminal 1, we charge $21.60 per square foot. Terminal 2, we charge $30.28 per square feet of area space. So our total rent for the year, we anticipate a 5% increase over the prior year. Utilities and charges. So We charge back the utilities back to those individuals who use our space in our airport. So our airlines who use space, our concessionaires who use space, we charge those utility charges back to them. Now, with the increase in utilities, you know, we've seen everything increase over the years, electric, gas, water, all of that has increased, so we do anticipate that rate increase will be passed back on to those users of the airport. And our concession revenue growth, interest and parking, all of that correlates with the travel growth. So with the travel growth that we anticipate, we do anticipate increases in concessions and parking. Interest, we have no control over that, but as you see, rate increases, interest rate has increased too. So we do anticipate a little bit of interest rate increase. Pledge PFCs, that is a complicated little item, but I'll talk about PFCs further down into this presentation, but those are passenger facility charges. And those passenger facility charges, we do anticipate a growth in those passenger facility charges. The items that you see in red, those are our pandemic relief funds that we receive from the federal government. So we still have some pandemic relief funds that we still have in place at our airport. We have a little bit of CARES revenue relief funds in place, and we still have some ARPA funds in place. And I do have a slide after this that will show you, you know, what those balances in those pandemic relief funds are. So this is just based upon, you know, how much do we anticipate to receive as far as reimbursement for those pandemic relief funds in fiscal year 24. So overall, we do anticipate our revenue to increase about 5.3 million, which is $213 million. In the prior year, it was 181, no, 172. Yeah. 480. Yeah, 100, nope. Well, the revised estimate, 179,472 was our total fiscal year 22 receipts, and then estimated for revenue for fiscal year 23 is 181 and 310 million. So on the next page, this will show you our anticipated increases for O&M. We break it up by O&M, our operation and maintenance expenses, our debt service, and then we add those two back together to show you the grand total of our anticipated increase in expenses. So overall, with our operation and maintenance expenses, we do anticipate a 21.76% increase. The reason why is because just like every other industry, inflation has hit our airport also. So the cost of materials, labor, our airport vacancy rate also has made these expenses a little bit higher than what we have seen in the prior year. Currently, our airport is experiencing a vacancy rate of about 39%. We have to supplement that with contractual arrangements with our contractors and vendors. And so we do anticipate those increases to increase at the airport. Our debt service. So we recently just issued $64 million in bonds for fiscal year 23 and our fiscal year 24 projects. So that is why you see a little bit of increase in our debt service over the prior year. But that's how we maintain our airport, is with issuing bonds and doing capital improvement programs to keep the airport running operationally smoothly. So a grand total O&M and debt expenses, we do expect to increase about 20.12%. That total, when you look at that in total expenses expect to be $206 million. The good thing is our revenues are expected to be $213 million, our expenses $208 million, so we have a little bit of coverage as far as like a budget perspective. Next slide will show you where we have been as far as like our budgeted positions. So this is budgeted positions. It's not where we actually are as far as how many actual personnel are at the airport, but this is what we budget for in our airports. And as you can see with this chart, this will show you where we were in fiscal year 11 compared to where we are in fiscal year 24. Around that fiscal year 11 timeframe, I believe we had still a lot of custodial staff on board at that point in time. We have reduced that staffing down through attrition and through utilizing contractual services for janitorial services. So now we're down to like 519 is our budgeted authorized level of employees. But as I mentioned before, we are right now experiencing a 39% vacancy rate. So that is not what our actual number of employees are.
And I think it's important to note on that, what we had an agreement.
Speaking of Mike, they can't.
We had an agreement, well, on the custodians that we would retain those as long as they wanted positions. They've attrited out dramatically, and it's been very hard, even back then, to replace on the custodial. So it was a recommendation from the state audit that we had in 2010 that be an outsourced position. Custodial staffs typically aren't within the civil service. So as they attrited out, and we've guaranteed all those employees jobs until such time they do, but that's why you've seen that dramatic drop in the staffing. It's not other positions that we've eliminated. It's almost all due to the custodial, and then you'll see the increase in the budget on the outsourced side for that.
Definitely, and we also take a close look at every departmental staffing, and if we need to remove positions, we do take a close look at that, and that has happened over the years to get down to this authorized level of 519. On the next slide, as I mentioned, we do have pandemic relief funds that we've received from the federal government. The first tranche of funds that we received was the CARES funds, the Corona's Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act funds. We were awarded $59.9 million. So far, we have received $55.3 million. Actually, it's a little bit more than that now. On your presentation slide, it shows that we have about $4.6 million remaining. We actually have about $3.8 million remaining as of today. The next amount of pandemic relief funds, which occurred in fiscal year 21 and 22, was the Corona Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Funds, which we named CARISA. We received two different types of funds in that area. There was about $13.5 million that we just we received as an award, and then we also received $1.6 million, which we received to use as concession relief. Because not only did the airport see a decrease in revenue and was also impacted by the pandemic, but our concessionaires was impacted dramatically by the pandemic as airport passengers decreased during that time frame. So we received about $15.2 million in total. We have utilized all of those funds, and we did issue out the concession relief funds to our concessionaires. So all of those funds, we do not have any remaining balance for CARISA. Our next group of funds that were awarded was awarded in fiscal year 22, the American Rescue Plan Act. We received a total of $56.2 million. And out of that $56.2 million, we did receive $6.6 million that was geared towards concession relief. We have issued all of those concession relief funds to our concessionaires. We still have remaining, it's a little bit lower than this now. Your presentation shows about $26.9 million. We have about $19 million that is remaining in ARPA relief funds. And during the pandemic, we also were able to take advantage of FEMA relief funds, so we received about $291,000 in FEMA relief funds. And then in fiscal year 22 was a new program that was enacted by Congress, which was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which affectionately is known as BIL or BILL. So that's an annual allocation. So that is an annual allocation of about $16 million. We did take advantage of the first grant funds, about $16 million. And so we have every year for next 4 years, another $16 million. It may change based upon our traveling public. So that number may increase, it may decrease. It depends on our employments at the airport. So right now, we anticipate another $16 million in the next fiscal year. Next slide. This will show you our debt service. So as I mentioned, the citizens of St. Louis are not responsible for paying any of our debt service. All of that is paid by the people who operate at the airport. The airlines, concessionaires, mainly the airlines, are responsible for this debt service that we take on to maintain our airport. So this will show you what our total debt service was between fiscal year 12 until now fiscal year 23. So at one point in time in fiscal year 12, our total debt service was $834 million. We've been able to reduce that by either just paying off the debt, or either we've taken on refinancing of the debt to decrease the amount of debt that we had on hand. So now, as of fiscal year 23, our debt service is $520 million. Next slide, we'll just show you graphically, where we anticipate the payoff of our debt will occur. So in fiscal year 23, you see our debt service, we pay about $60 million in fiscal year 23. It will go up a little bit in fiscal year 24 and 25 because we're going to pay a little bit more interest up front for the debt service that we just released in fiscal year 23. But as you see, this chart will show you that by 2052, our debt service is pretty small, pretty minimal by the time we get to 2052.
And this is including the new concourse and,
It is not including the new terminal.
okay.
It does not include the new terminal. I think what this slide represents and what we've been able to show the airlines is if we move forward with the consolidated terminal project, as bonds are coming on, most of our bonds will be paid off from that were there. So we're in good shape to be able to take on new debt with some other streams of increased revenue that we can talk about. But most of that debt would be coming on after 2032. Some of it would come on before that. But as you see, the debt falls off pretty dramatic in those later years, which is when the new debt would be coming on and carried out for 20 to 25 years.
And at the risk of being redundant and asking for additional clarification, we've seen a lot about the proposed upgrades at Lambert. This does not include that because they haven't been, those plans haven't been fully approved, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So there are some terminal improvements in these 2 years that we see here that are in 24 and 25. Those were ongoing capital improvement projects that would stay even if a new terminal comes. So for instance, some upgrade to some of the infrastructure part that's out there, some upgrades to an emergency operations center. So there are some things that we're doing now that would stay and be part of the new terminal going forward. But the bulk of what we're talking about on the consolidated terminal project and the whole new terminal is not in this budget.
And what is the timeline for that process, for that project?
We are currently in the environmental impact study, which is about 12 months. So that clock started about a month ago on the first phase. The second phase of that should kick in here in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So we have a 12-month window for that study in conjunction with the FAA. We're also negotiating with the airlines doing that same window. So we are hoping in those next 12 months that we will have the formal agreement to move this forward, and then we would start issuing architectural designs. The project itself, from start to finish, would finish in 2030, early 2031. You would see a lot of the phasing along the way of the new terminal opening up, but it's an 8-year-long project.
Okay, all right, thank you for that clarification.
So in future presentations, once we receive that approval, this chart would be updated to kind of show, what that debt service would look like over the years. But right now, we did not include that in our presentation because we still have those approvals. Next slide. So this gives you a broad overview of how the airport derives its funding sources. As I mentioned before, we do not derive any revenue from the taxing of the citizens of St. Louis, but we are self-funded. So the 5 sources of funding that you see here is how we receive our funding. The first funding source is airline rates and charges. As I mentioned, we charge our airlines a landing fee, and we charge them a terminal rental rate. And those costs are what we call our airline rates and charges. The airlines agree to these charges. We have an airport use and lease agreement with what we call our signatory airlines, and all other airlines that operate at the airport, or what we refer to as our non-signatory airlines, they sign an airport operating agreement, and they pay a little bit more than those fees that are charged to the signatory airline. So their first primary source of revenue is airline rates and charges. The next source is Airport and Airways Trust Fund. You may hear, mainly you hear the word airport improvement grants. So we actually receive airport improvement grants from the federal government. Approximately $3.18 billion is annually given to airports for runways, taxiways, and other security improvements throughout the airport. Our airport received in fiscal year '22, $12.4 million. So that just kind of gives you an idea of how much airport improvement grants that we do receive. We also receive sometimes local grants. So Department of Transportation, we may receive some grants, or other grant funding. We do look for local grant funding sources around in our area. The next item that we receive is what's called a passenger facility charge user fee. So if you're a passenger traveling through an airport, you may see, if you look at your ticket closely, a $4.50 charge. So for the first 2 legs of your trip, you are charged $4.50. The airport receives $4.39. The airlines retain 11 cents. The airlines are the ones who actually collect those passenger facility charges, and then they issue the $4.39 per passenger back to the airport. And then we have to take an application back to the federal government to request to use those funds. And those funds are primarily used for the interior of the airport, so the actual terminal improvements of the airport. So we did collect about $23.2 million in passenger facility charges in fiscal year '22. And that actually is a little smaller than what we were used to, because, you know, we're still coming out of the pandemic and our passengers were not at the level that it was prior to fiscal year '20. The next funding source is non-aeronautical revenue. So when you travel through the airport, you know, you see concessionaires serving food, beverages, retail, and then we also have a parking operator at the airport. So that's what you call our non-aeronautical revenue. So that non-aeronautical revenue is also how we help fund the airport and the programs at the airport. The next level of funding is general airport revenue bonds. So we issue bonds periodically to help with our capital improvement programs at the airport. As I mentioned previously, we just issued $64 million earlier this year for our fiscal year '23 and '24 program. So we take our capital improvement plan to the airlines, we receive approval from the airlines, and then we also we ask for approval from the board to issue bonds to move forward with our capital improvement program. So for fiscal year '23 and '24, that amount was $64 million. So next slide. This gives you a little bit more background also about grant funding. So when you look at grant funding from a federal government perspective, they look at the airport as the people who operate the airport as the airport sponsor and airport management. The airport sponsor in this case is the City of St. Louis. City of St. Louis Board of Aldermen, you are the airport sponsor. And airport management is myself and the airport director. And we have to ensure that the airport operates in the best interest of all stakeholders in order to receive grant funding. The other thing with grant funding, federal government, is we have to maintain self-sustainability. So the FAA encourages all airports to be self-sustainable, meaning that all operational expenses should be covered by airport revenues. The last thing is grant assurances. To receive those grants, we need to make sure that The airports that are accepting FAA grants must operate under a variety of federal regulations. There are several regulations. Matter of fact, we just did a compliance review with the FAA last week, which is called Title VI, non-discrimination. Again, it's another set of regulations that airports have to abide by, but there are several other regulation advisory documents, best practices, grant assurances, FAA orders, and TSA security directives that we have to abide by to receive these grants from the FAA. And also those grant assurances stipulates that revenue generated on airport property is required to be used for operation of the airport. So we cannot just send money to the city of St. Louis, except for in the next slide, I would talk about an exception to that. So an exception to that is what we call our gross receipts tax. So next slide. So, as I previously has completely mentioned, is that all airport revenue must maintain within the airport, operate in the airport. However, the government enacted a law in 1982 that allowed some airports that were already giving money to their city to continue giving some money annually to their city, based upon a certain calculation that's adjusted by the Consumer Price Index every year. So it's a complex calculation that you go through to determine how much you will send to the city of St. Louis. And right now, the amount that we have sent to the city of St. Louis as of fiscal year 22 was $5.7 million. And then we'll go through that calculation again to determine how much we'll give to the city of St. Louis. I believe our estimate for fiscal year 24 was about $6 million is what we anticipate on giving to the city of St. Louis in fiscal year 24. But this is the only revenue source that we can give to the city of St. Louis. We cannot give anything else other than what is enacted by federal laws. And then lastly was just a slide that just showed you our timeline. We did have an airline consultation. We talked with them in February. We took this budget forward to the Airport Commission. It was part of the board of E&A when Paul Payne submitted the budget, and he talked about the enterprise fund, so that was part of this. And then, of course, our meeting here today, which I guess we're not called the Ways and Means Committee anymore. so I have to take that out. And of course, we just anticipate, the budget will hopefully be passed before the end of June. And fiscal year 24 would start, and we would actually take this budget that we have presented, and we will actually embed that into the rates and charges that we will charge to the airlines.
Okay, thank you so much. This is so helpful. So I think just a little bit of additional background that might be helpful. Airports are considered by the federal government, the FAA, part of a infrastructure for the nation, and therefore they do provide grant funding, that $12 million that we got this last year, and they totally require that the revenues generated in airports stay in the airports. So the nice thing is, even though we are the sponsor, we're one of like 6, I think, airports in the United States, 12, I couldn't remember the number, out of hundreds that actually get a revenue out of our airport, $5-6 million. So thank you so much for making sure that we get that every year. That was at threat when we were talking about potentially privatizing the airport or something like that. So we're grateful to keep that income coming into the city. And that you all are governed outside, but rely heavily on the Board of Aldermen in the city of St. Louis for some governance. Somewhat unusual as far as our city departments are concerned or how we oversight. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to some questions from the committee in order of seniority. Vice Chair Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you all for being here. I know, which I learned maybe 2 years ago, might have been 3, that the employees are under the city, correct? They're our city employees.
Yes, they are under the civil service system.
Okay. And so you all contract, I'm asking, I'm not stating a fact, you contract out for the buses, for the airport buses to take passengers and families back and forth for the airport.
We do, so we have a parking, so we own 2 garages and 5 parking lots, and we'll build a 6th parking lot this year. That, we then put out an RFP, a request for proposals, every 3 years for a parking manager to manage those lots and to provide, we buy the shuttles, but they operate them, and those are employees of theirs. So yes, that is one of the outsourced functions.
And so who's responsible for maintaining those shuttles, making sure those are safe for the staff that's driving and the people we're transporting?
Well, ultimately, it's the airport's responsibility because we do own the lots and the shuttles. But the parking management team that we have, which currently is SP Plus, they are the ones responsible for the maintenance on them. And then we have oversight on a quarterly basis, looking at their records and being able. And I know we just had an inquiry from you, which we responded to. So that is something that, those shuttles have to meet because they actually operate on the highways. So they're under a lot of regulations to meet all of those required state DOT regulations.
Okay, and so are they like on a schedule, maintenance? Because some of the issues that were brought up, that's telling me they weren't maintained under a schedule maintenance. And so, as I stated, it's a safety issue for the staff and for the passengers. So did we correct that, or did they transfer out to get new shuttles, or?
Well, we did look into that, and we responded, and we obviously called SP Plus in to do all the records. So all those records were maintained, and the shuttles had been maintained under the requirements that are there. We have a periodic purchase of new shuttles, so I think the life of our shuttles normally is about a 5 to 7 year window. Sometimes they can extend longer depending on the type of shuttle, but we do purchase new shuttles, and we go through a rigorous program to evaluate those shuttles and look at them. I think from a perspective of the parking management team, and we've had a number of teams over the years, we set the requirements of what they have to do in maintaining them, and then they're required to do that. So as a part of the record check, we did that, and all of them did have the regular maintenance on them.
Okay, I guess from my perspective, I always think about the people on the floor, the grassroots employees, because they usually are the ones. And no disrespect to people in management, because I've been there, done that, but I've been the person that was on the floor too. And so a lot of times people on the floor are seeing things that we don't even see. And so I'm just trying to make sure that whoever is overseeing these buses and shuttles, that they're making sure that they're safe. Because the biggest fear when I got the information, the biggest fear I would dread is a major lawsuit against us, meaning the airport, in regards to a passenger or somebody being hurt because of the malfunction of the equipment. And so thank you for responding quickly. You did respond quickly, but it just concerned me because to me, that's something that should never have even been stated, because if they were on point, those things shouldn't have happened. So that's just my concern. I don't think it's anything to you all as manager, because like I said, you all are upper, and so you on a whole nother level. But the people that's doing it every day, they know what's going on. They can tell you what the deals are. And so that comes from us, and I had to learn when I was in management, listen to our employees, because they can tell us stuff that we never even thought about. And so, thank you. That's all I had.
You're welcome. I will say, I've been here 14 years, and we've never had an incident with one of our buses in those 14 years. So we do have a very good safety record on that, and I agree with you. Sometimes we need to hear things from the employees just to double check and make sure that everything is staying as it should.
Yeah.
So thank you for your inquiry.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's impressive. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. The debt the airport has, is that pretty consistent with other airports, or is this, how does that work in general?
Is what consistent, I'm sorry?
The 500 and.
Oh, the debt.
Debt,
Oh,
yes.
Yes, that's for a medium hub, that's very consistent with other airports. And I think what's really important and what we've tried to show, especially in the slide where they show the declining debt is, we worked really hard to get to this point where we had a lot of our credit rating upgraded. We obviously worked with the comptroller and her staff as well to be able to get those bonds upgraded. And then we've done a number of refundings over the last several years and just got really good credit reports again. So we've been able to pay that debt down on a pretty aggressive rate. What the airlines look at is really their cost per enplane passenger, and going forward, a combination of both the terminal rental rates as well as the landed weight and what they're willing to go to. So if you look at that, last year, $450 million, then we sold some debt for the improvements that the airlines wanted to do at our airport. That is a very average debt load and gives us the ability to be able to think about going out for future bonds as we think about this new terminal. And that is one thing I wanted to make sure that the committee knew, was that when we do go out for bond sale, that is through the comptroller's office, and then that does come through the Board of Aldermen for approval on any of the bond sales, obviously.
Right, thank you. In terms of vacancy of vendors, how are the stalls looking? Are we full with vendors at the airport, or how?
Oh, we're busting at the seams. This morning, Kingside Diner opened, so if anybody's traveling on the Sea Concourse, Kingside Diner. It is one of the things that we talk about all the time in terms of we could use more vending. The challenge is we have no more space to put vending post-security, and that's where everybody wants restaurants and retail. So part of the look at the new terminal, if we move forward, is to create 60% more concession space. But we did have, and we've been heavily focused on swapping out some of the restaurants and really focusing on local. So this morning, the Kingside Diner opened. Later this year, you'll see Shake Shack open, and then you'll also see Peacemakers for those who live in the city and know Peacemakers down in Soulard. They'll be opening later in the year as well. So we're changing some venues, but we're not necessarily creating new spaces because we're out of space.
And you anticipate those sales will be higher than the previous tenants?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great idea to include more vending space in the new terminal. That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Alderwoman Saunier?
Just thank you for coming. I think this is a good breakdown. I learned a lot. No questions at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Aldrich?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow back up on Alderwoman Schweitzer's question, she kind of took it from me before it came this way. But so are we all, we are at 100% capacity with concessions?
We are. We try to squeeze in anything that we can, anywhere. And right now, the only space that we really have available, we have a vending contract that works through vending machines, and that is a minority partner that we had that's had the vending contract. We are looking at next month's commission bringing forward some expansion for them to put some additional vending machines, but those are vending machines. So we just recently added Farmer's Fridge, if anybody's familiar with that particular vending. It's a really good product. But as far as the restaurants, I mean, there is no space. Everything is a swap out if we do anything.
Well, I never heard of them, but it sounds like Alderwoman Schweitzer have, and she said they're good vending. Also, I want to comment and say, it sounds good that more locals, folks that we can bring in. I'm not against big corporations, but, well, kind of am. But, I mean, but to have, to uplift our local talent like Peacemakers and folks that are invested here in St. Louis and to give them opportunity at the airport, I think is great. I do want to ask, how's the Lufthansa airline going?
It's gangbusters, and I would be surprised if anybody could find an open seat this summer to book. So we have consistently, other than the month of February, we have consistently run 90% load factors on that flight, in and out. So it's been extremely well received. Lufthansa has shared with us that had they had available pilot and aircraft flying time, they would have increased it to 5 days a week this summer, but it's just like the industry right now is still pulling back, trying to hire. So we do expect and have our fingers crossed that next summer we would be at 5 days a week. We're currently at 3 days a week, so it's doing very well.
Good to hear, good to hear. Thank you, Commissioner, and I would just recommend to my members on the committee that the commissioner sent out an email for us to take a tour of the airport. I think it'd be a huge opportunity for us to do it, because I know I am, so thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, or Director, one thing that is not in here that I think is worth talking about a little bit is those, we discussed how the revenue is generated from the landing fees. It's really paid for by the airlines. And those landing fees are regulated by the federal government as far as what we can charge, and that's based on revenues and passengers in and out and that sort of thing. And one thing that I know, sometimes there's criticism in the community about our airport not serving as many people as it used to when we were a TWA hub, et cetera, and kind of walking through those landing fees and how they've been steadily coming down under your leadership and making us a more competitive airport, and how that kind of works as far as the revenue piece is concerned.
Sure, it's an odd concept because you think you want, the revenues to go up on landing fees. We actually want the revenues to go down, and that's because that's our landed weight has gone down. So the landed weight is a derivative of your outstanding debt on your runway system and the revenue that you can generate from landed aircraft. So we've been fortunate in that we've had new partners come to the table. We've added quite a few flights with Frontier. We brought Spirit to the table. We brought Lufthansa to the table. We brought Amazon to the table a couple of years ago. We're doing the USDA live animal facility, so we're seeing charter activity there every month or every 2 months. Those are 747 aircraft, but very heavy landed weight. And of course, we've seen the growth of Southwest and the expansion that Southwest has had. And one of the things I think it's critically important for everybody to understand is the connecting traffic that Southwest is pushing through St. Louis. So they are 55% of our market share in St. Louis, and of that, 33% of their market is connecting through here. What that means is that's bringing more airplanes through here for more nonstop destinations for the benefit of our local residents. And so that is an extremely important piece, that connecting traffic. We're very hopeful that we're going to continue to see that grow. But all of that landed weight is bringing in substantial revenues for our airfield. And as you saw through the slide that Antonio, a lot of that debt is coming off. So our debt on the airfield has been dramatically reduced. The revenues are strong coming in, and that lowers the landed weight. You want that landed weight to be lower because you want the airlines to want to come here. And if their costs are too exorbitant and they can't generate, airlines are obviously for-profit entities, so they look at locations where they can generate revenue and profit margins. And so you want that landed weight to be able to come down so that more can be created. And I think, the team has done a substantial job of seeing increased activity here over the last 10 years. And I will say this fall in September, we'll see the best schedule that we've had since 2009. So Southwest will be at 130 flights a day. In the peak in 2019, they were at 124 a day. So even going into this, and they would have loved to, again, have done it for the summer, but most of their pilots will be coming on board in the fall. So we'll see a pretty busy schedule going into this fall.
That's so nice to hear. If you don't mind, could you share some of those highlights with us so we can help celebrate and understand the work that's going on there and the increased traffic and the increased
Planes, activity, concessions, all those things.
The bringing down of those fees and how the competitiveness of the airport and how we're improving that, over the years. Yeah. Would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think, the whole team has been very focused on making sure that we drive revenues and bring costs down and create partnerships. And so we've been able to do all of that. The other thing that you'll see coming out in the near months. We are looking at, and obviously those would come through this board as well, but we're looking at an opportunity for an RFP to go out for about 300 acres of underutilized land now. So the debt on that is now at a point where we can go out and use that for non-governmental use. So that'll be coming out here hopefully this fall, and we think there's a lot of interest in doing that. It's non-airfield access, but it's 300 acres that we think that we can have a development come in and do something with. And there's some other things we're working on some land leases that I think would also be coming before the Board of Aldermen in the near future. But all of those things are revenue streams that really help bring more revenue into the airport and keep those costs low.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you for coming. I know this is not part of our board bill, but it's certainly very, very instructive. And, I think we're all very grateful. I know it took a longer time to get started. So thank you very much for your flexibility and your willingness to come educate this committee. And hopefully that will bode well with these upcoming issues that are coming before the Board of Aldermen. So
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And appreciate all the work that city employees do at the airport.
Thank you.
And with that, our last item, I know, we're very late, I know, is our water department, the last enterprise fund that the city has. And all three of our enterprise funds are set up a little differently, kind of interesting.
You want to go? If not, a secretary has one somewhere.
Oh, you know what, they're like,
If you want to take mine,
you know what, they're extra in my purse.
oh.
Thanks. I was like, where the heck am I? Okay, good morning. Water, 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 the best water in the world. Thank you. Best water, okay. I have to say, the tour of the water department has been my favorite tour so far, but I haven't done the airport.
Well, you won't compare. I'm biased.
Do love our water. Okay, Director Scobie, if you don't mind, introduce yourself and all that's under the St. Louis City Water Division to the committee.
I'll do so. My name is Kurt Scobie, which most of you know. I'm the Director of Public Utilities for the City of St. Louis. The Water Commissioner position is vacant underneath me, and at times I will serve in that capacity as required. The City of St. Louis has owned its own water utility since 1835 and has maintained and operated it continuously since that time. The overview, my notes are very short. Is the Water Division is an enterprise fund that operates on the revenue it generates from the services it provides to its customers. The Water Division does not receive funding from general revenue. The division has 360 employee positions operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to provide safe, clean water to St. Louis. We provide an essential service that touches the lives of every citizen and every business every day of the year. Our facilities are our Kings Highway office at 44 in Kings Highway. We have our customer service, our finance, and administration sections located at those offices. We have the McCree offices, and our operation yard is the transmission and distribution system service center. Our street crews work out of that facility. We have 2 water treatment plants, the Chain of Rocks in North City on the Mississippi, and the Howard Bend plant on the Missouri River out in Chesterfield. We have 2 water storage reservoirs, Compton Hill at Grand and 44, and then Stacy Park reservoir off of Olive Street in Olivet. Then we have our water distribution system that covers the whole city. Is roughly 1,300 miles of water mains, 15,000 fire hydrants, 80,000 residential service connections, 26,000 valves ranging in size from 4-inch to 60-inch, 16,000 commercial and residential water meters. Total revenue for fiscal year 2024 is estimated at being $68.9 million. This estimate is based upon the assumption that there will be a rate increase enacted in the fiscal year 2024. Total revenue from the rate increase is estimated at $13.8 million. Total expenditures are projected to increase by 10% in the fiscal year 2024 compared to the fiscal year 2023. For the last 3 fiscal years, there were steep increases in personnel services, materials and supplies, contractual services, and unplanned repairs. This trend will continue in the fiscal year 2024. Due to the Water Division's overall vacancy of 33%, electrical, HVAC, pumping, and motor repair, construction, debris hauling, water main repairs, and that's only some of them, and other emergency repairs are being contracted out. Contractual services is projected at $26.7 million, an increase of $6.7 million or 34% compared to fiscal year 2023. Due to the continual increase in expenditure and declining revenues, the Water Division has been using its revenue funds to balance the budget for several years now. These funds are expected to be depleted at the end of the current fiscal year. So that's the end of my prepared statement, so I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Director. So it's so we have water treatment in both the city and the county.
Yes.
And we are serving city residents, and we also are selling water to St. Louis County, right, through Missouri American Water, is that right?
We have some wholesale customers. Missouri American Water is one of those.
Okay.
We wholesale to a City of St. Charles, City of St. Peters, and District Water, well, I did Missouri American, but District 2 in St. Charles County, we wholesale water to them.
And we're a little bit it's unusual, this is our main utility. I mean, you're the Director of Public Utilities. We do have a steam loop, but that's separate, and I don't fully understand that connection there, but most utilities, Ameren, Spire, et cetera, are under the Public Service Commission, which is a state function that oversees the rates and the function of those utilities. In the case of water, St. Louis City Water, the Board of Aldermen essentially is the oversight for that public utility. Is that correct?
It is. It's operated underneath the mayor's office, but in the end, it's the Board of Aldermen that sets the rate through the normal board bill.
Okay, and so it's kind of unusual. We have a fairly large responsibility here with regards to the public utility that is our water, which is essential for life. It's a utility you cannot live without. And we do, of course, enjoy some of the best water in the nation, despite having some of the lowest rates on providing that water. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit perplexed about how we have a budget that includes a rate hike that we haven't even seen or discussed. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I said, I assumed that.
We just got done with the airport, and the airport is considering an expansion, but of course, we're looking at a budget without that expansion. So the difference is not, is
yeah,
somewhat
I
very.
understand. It was, some thought went into it. It isn't assumed that automatically we're going to get a water rate increase. But we do need one, and we need to have we really need the money. But the thought was that we include it in the budget, because then it's authorized should we get it, and we can utilize it, as opposed to basing a budget on current revenues and then get a rate increase that we really need to utilize in this coming fiscal year, and having to seek additional authorization to spend this money that will be coming in.
But what would happen if the rate increase doesn't match what you're projecting here? Because there's certainly going to be some public discourse about the rate increase and how it's going to be structured and that sort of thing. So what is the thinking behind including this specific rate increase, which I don't know that we even know the details of?
Right, it hasn't been presented to the board. Our thoughts are, and the way it would be, is that we're not spending money that we don't have. So what we would go and do is go through our budget and figure out where we're not spending money so that we bring in line with our revenue. And that's something that we've done in past in lean times and downturn economies. Even though we might have money there, but we know we need to conserve it, we just cut.
One thing that's clear from the revenue estimates versus the expenditure category is that the revenues that we're generating from our water department are significantly less than what it is we're spending on our water department. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you, and I'm assuming in order to make those ends meet, because you're set up as an enterprise fund and there's no general revenue going into the water department, you're eating into or utilizing your reserve fund. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're utilizing and have been for, I think, the last 3 years, tapping into it to balance our budget.
No pun intended, right?
Yes,
Director?
yes.
All right. Can you tell us what the reserve fund has been or what it looks like? I don't see that anywhere in here, and we've looked at that for other departments.
Oh, yeah. At the end, we're utilizing, is it 16 million?
How much do we have in reserve funds currently?
What's the amount in a reserve fund?
So currently we have around 26 million. Sorry. Currently we have around 26 million. However, this total cash in bank and all, including investments, that is not a spendable money. All of that is not spendable money. We have deposits, so restricted funds, and such as customer deposits.
Can you identify yourself to the committee, please?
Oh, I'm so sorry. My name is Perla Burke, and I am the fiscal manager for the Water Division.
Fiscal manager.
Sorry.
Scola Burke?
Burke.
Burke.
Perla Burke.
Burke.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. Thank you.
B-U-R-K-E.
B-U-R-K. Yeah.
B-U-R-K.
Thanks.
So we have $26 million in reserves.
Yes. So I just kind of based it on as of
We have
April.
that amount in the bank, but it's not all available. Some of it's
Yeah.
already.
The mic, please.
Sorry. Sorry. Some of that money is already spoken for in things that we have purchased and committed to purchase, but not have received and actually made payment on. We also have deposits from customers for meter deposits and construction deposits and others that we have to return to them. We also have, we operate the service line insurance program. There's money that's included in that amount that's not ours for operational.
Okay, but going back to the reserve funds, if I'm looking at last year, we have estimated income of 51 million and expenditures of 67 million.
Yes,
That's a deficit of 16 million in 1 year.
yes,
And then the previous year, we were looking at revenues of 50 million and expenditures of 61 million, and a deficit of 11.5 million.
yes.
That's,
We're utilizing our reserve funds to make up the difference in each of those years.
okay. Okay, that's a pretty significant problem we've got on our hands. Just real quickly, so we have an understanding of where the revenues are coming from. We've got the sale of flat rate water at 60 million is the sale of water. Is that just to city residents?
Yes, and that includes the meter accounts, too.
Okay, meter account.
That's the way it's labeled there.
Right, and then the wholesale would be that sale of water to St. Charles County and Missouri American Water, et cetera? So
Yes.
that only makes up about 10% of our revenue, is that wholesale?
Yes.
Okay. Then you've got a miscellaneous item of 1.8 million.
Yes, those are fees that we collect for like tapping fees for new service lines, for sometimes like MoDOT will pay to have us relocate a water main, so that'll be revenue for that. So it's miscellaneous to that.
Okay. And the bank is paying us, for some reason, $5,000 a year?
Any money that we're not utilizing in the immediate future, we put it in an account that draws interest until we
okay.
need it.
Good job, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're basing this budget based on a rate increase, but we don't have the rate increase before us. Can you tell us, generally speaking, what we're basing this budget on as far as that's concerned?
Yes, it's a substantial amount. Ideally, we'll get a 20% rate increase by July 1st. It would go into effect, and then a second one, January 1st of 2024. Now, those are 20%.
20% each?
Each, so it'd be 40 altogether. But for our average customer, our rates are so low, it's, each of these increases will amount to the equivalent of maybe $5 a month. Our rates are low. So even though it's a higher percentage, the actual dollar amount is not what it might be expected, is the point I'm trying to make.
Okay, well, I think I've asked enough questions on the front. I'll turn over to committee members who I'm sure have some questions. Thank you. In order of seniority, I'll start with Alderwoman Boyd.
She asked most of the questions. And so, thank you all for coming. I guess because I've been doing a lot of question asking in regards to this whole price hike in regards to the water bill. And so I know it was talked about, I just want to say, and Kurt, you can clarify, about 3 or 4 years ago, that you all were trying to encourage people to change out from flat to meter rate. And so that would kind of help leverage some of the costs that we were having if people had went that route. So a lot of people didn't do that. So you only had a small percentage that went meter rate.
Yes.
And then two, my concern is, are the seniors, because I know they benefit more by flat rate, but they're on a set income. So now we're talking 20% increase. Is there any way we could look at doing smaller increments as to 20% for July? I'm just saying, I know it's not in stone, 20% in July and 20% in January. Is there any way we could spread it out to make it smaller increments of increase? Because right now, what we're dealing with, we have a lot of seniors that can't even pay MSD bills because of their price hikes that have occurred to them, and they're on a set income. So we have to rely on St. Louis Area for Agency or other agencies to kind of help them with those bills. And so I don't want us to get in that situation with the water bills. And I understand the situation that we're in because our pipes are so old. I mean, it's just unrealistic. And all you're doing is going through the city putting Band-Aids on a hemorrhaging system. And so I'm just trying to figure out a way to make it some type of win and make sure that people that are on those set incomes aren't impacted, because I mean, on your end, I understand, and you all are bleeding when it comes to your reserve. You have like deplenished it as much as you can. And we have a city that we have to run, but we have so many seniors that are impacted by our decisions. And one of those decisions are the price hikes. And so that's why I was asking the question.
Oh, yes, I am very sensitive to the increases, because I hear from our customers the trouble that they get into. Perla is over our customer service, so it can be a struggle. Even though I say the dollar amount isn't as much as it might be from the sound of the percentage, it's still significant to many people.
Right.
Our situation is, the last rate increase was 2010, 13 years ago.
Right.
So, and we've depleted our revenues. We're in a hole. And the percentages we're asking for are just to basically keep us operating. It's what we need. And I would like to be able to spread it out, but we're kind of in a bind. I mean, moving forwards, and this has been discussed in the past, is that every couple years we do a smaller increase that's more palatable for people to absorb, but it's hard to get the legislation introduced and passed, and no one likes a rate increase. So if they can kick it down the road, I think it gets kicked.
And so that's why I was asking, is there a way we can do it? Because I know when we got audited before, the recommendations was to do a gradual increase for the water bill. And so, and I knew you all were considerate of the pandemic, and so that's why you didn't do it, because you were figuring people were already suffering. So I'm just trying to look at it where the people that will be the greatly impacted, even if, ironically, I had a lady call and say, you know, my bill was $72. But then I had somebody from the county that said, you know what, Alderwoman, she said her bill was $72. Mine was $272. And that's because they're on meter rate. And so I'm just trying to figure out how we can come to a mutual agreement to make it somehow, and I know everybody's not going to be satisfied, but to figure out some way for us to come to a mutual agreement and how we can do that. That's why I said, well, can we do a gradual increase to do it that way, to, you know, to start the process? And I was just asking, because in my community, I know, I'm calling you all constantly about, I'm running into water, you know, pipes are busting. And now I've gotten so good, when I ride down the street and I see a puddle of water, I already know what's going on. And I'll call Kurt, I think the line that busted. So I already know I've gotten that good with it. So that's what I'm just trying to figure out, how we can make this a positive, because eventually everything is going to go up in regards to the city and services. And so we just have to figure out a way to make it where it's not impacting our seniors as much as it has been in regards to dollar amount. So that's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderwoman Schweitzer?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. You and I talked a lot about this on Friday, so you answered a lot of questions then. I have a few more. You know, it looks like revenue has been less than expenses since 2020. Is that how, I mean, is that when you first brought up a need for an increase in the rate, or did you bring that up before 2020? I mean, how long has this been something that you've asked for and Alderman hasn't sponsored?
Well, it's, I would say 6 or 7 years we have been discussing it, and I don't recall exactly.
I can corroborate that. This is, to some extent, I mean, we have kind of kicked the can down a long time on water increases.
Yeah, that's just disturbing. I think we can all agree, you know, this is.
Correct.
It's kind of the buck stops here is always that saying that I think we all want to have in our roles as elected officials. But it is also a hard pill to swallow when it's sort of like, well, if you don't do this now, we will literally not be able to operate at all. I mean, it seems like such a crucial piece of the ability for the water division to operate.
Yes, it will be financially in a crisis, so.
Right. And in order to have this go into effect by July 1st, we'd have to have an emergency clause in the board bill. And this has been an emergency for 6 years. I mean, how?
It's, I guess so. I haven't looked at that aspect of the timeline of passing the bill.
Okay. Yeah, because it seems, yeah, it's tough to swallow, I think, knowing that this could have been a more gradual increase over the last several years, and also with $500 million of federal funds coming into the city. Did the Water Division at any point that I didn't see or miss somehow request funding, any federal funding?
We have requested funding mostly through the state of Missouri, and we've been successful for a $200,000 grant and then we've just requested a second $200,000 grant, which I think will be successful at. These are for building a service line inventory that is required of us. And then we applied for some capital improvement funds, but we did not score high enough on the state's ranking system to receive it.
But not from any American Rescue Plan Act funds?
We've asked, but it's, you know, we're not part of that decision. The city has many needs, and we don't have any of that funds.
I understand. It's just, you know, looking at the year that the concern started, coupled with the American Rescue Plan and CARES Act funding coming in, coupled with, you know, knowing that there would be a rate increase coming up, it just seems, it's hard. Again, another thing that's hard to swallow, knowing that no ARPA funds have been allocated to anything in the Water Division.
I understand, but.
I know we've talked about it already. I just need to say it out loud again publicly.
I understand.
As part of the job. Another thing that is in here is the sale of water wholesale. That's an estimated $1 million to go up. Can you speak to that?
Sure, I will. We expect City of St. Charles to buy more water from us. Some of their wells, most of these utilities have the ability to produce water themselves or buy it from another supplier. And but City of St. Charles, they have contamination in some of their wells. They've had to shut them down and rely on our water more. And so we anticipate that will translate into additional revenue for us.
Great. And when do those contracts get negotiated?
They're long-term. They may be 25 years or longer. And I would have to look at the timeline on some of them. The closest one is Missouri American, which will be, I believe, in 2 years that will come due to be renegotiated.
And we had discussed also that those contracts do have built-in clauses to increase the rate based on inflation, or no?
Well, it's based upon actual costs of the producing the water and the infrastructure involved with it, plus 18%, which is covering overhead and other expenses. So it's adjusted annually and is based on the actual cost. So it works. We're looking at maybe $6 million of additional funds, and it also, we can supply these other utilities with water that they could use.
And if the rate does increase and there's more wholesale water sold in the future, we spoke about there's a lot more capacity for wholesale selling. And would you anticipate that building out a plan to service the water lines? I know so much has not happened and changed in generations, really. So how do you plan long-term, I guess, for how, what money is needed in order to prevent crises that we've seen in other communities? And I guess, how do you do that planning?
It's it's something that, one thing I like to do is a master plan, so to speak, on identifying all the needs and how to fund it and what rates need to be set. And we have never done that. And, but that's something that I would like to do. It would lay it out, and hopefully it would help with getting the funding and support that we need.
Do you anticipate any of the funds from the state will be working on that?
No.
So that would be a whole separate
It'd be
thing.
probably funded by our own revenue.
Sure, which, even if the revenue does increase, there's still, is that right, that there's still a $5 million gap?
There is. We anticipate to have a little bit more reserves that we can put towards it, and then we'll cut to whatever our revenue is. Eliminate stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's tough to hear that. I think mainly just knowing how much need there is in maintaining our water systems and how crucial that is now and will be in our changing climate future, not knowing what that will look like, or what decisions we make now and how that will impact the availability of clean water for future generations to come. When you and I spoke, we talked about when 100 years ago there were a lot of investments into water infrastructure. Those folks were thinking about us now. They probably didn't think that. They probably did not think that we would still be using those same pipes now, but I'm glad they were well made at least. And I know so the state fund you said was mostly for identifying lead, is that right?
It's lead primarily, but also we need to capture what is the material if it's not lead.
Right.
And building an inventory, which will be shared with the public that they can log on and see, and annually keep it up to date.
Okay. I'm sure I'll have a million more questions, but I do want to formally recognize Ryan Coleman for his help in preparing for these questions. There's a lot to go through. I really appreciate your time. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Hello.
Hello.
I guess my question is, because you're still not sure about the amount of the rate increase, but did you say something about needing it to take effect by July 1st? What did you say about July 1st?
We would ideally like to have 20% increase take effect July 1st of this year, and then a second increase January 1st of this coming year. And but the legislation would have to be passed for that to happen.
So that you all are in the process of identifying the rate, because I mean that legislation will have to start soon.
Yes, it would. It's a matter of you can go to our current rates and multiply it by 20%. It's a breakdown of different costs in there, and it's straight across the board, 20% increase.
Okay, and then I guess I would just echo sort of what Alderwoman Boyd was saying earlier. I think I would be very curious about whatever we can do or whatever pattern we can do. I'm thinking specifically of senior citizens, but also those disabled people who are on fixed incomes where, for someone like me, $5 or $10 is marginal, but, obviously there are folks in our communities that could have an impact on, especially if we plan on hiking it again, which I understand we need a functional operating water department, but just anything that we may be able to do to help folks with fixed incomes who may be impacted by this. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That concludes my questioning.
Alderman Aldrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. To piggyback off Alderwoman Saunier, so you say July 1st, 20% increase, and then would that be another 20% increase in January that you're asking?
Yes. Yes.
So July is like 5 weeks away.
Yes.
And I know I'm new at this board, but that's probably a quick process to get the legislation ready, educate the community on your bills about to go up, try to pass it. I mean, I want to also kind of, and I understand that a rate increase hasn't happened since, 2013, you know, but as also echo the sentiments of Alderwoman, Schweitzer, that this is, it's like almost like a knife to your neck. Like, you got to do this because at the end of the day, our water division is underwater. No pun on words, right? But it's also it's a hard pickle to be put in, especially like Alderwoman Saunier and Alderwoman Boyd mentioned in some areas throughout the city. People are just struggling to keep their lights on, and without notice, letting them know that their water's about to go up, not once but twice.
Yes.
So in January, what would that percentage be?
It would be a second 20%. It's 20% both times.
So is that 20%? I keep hearing people say $5, about $5 or $10.
For our average customer, it'll be equivalent, each 20% would be equivalent of $5 a month. When the second one goes in, that'd be additional $5, or together it'd be $10 a month equivalent increase.
I'm just thinking like 5 weeks away. Have the board been communicated about this? Because I mean, clearly, never mind. Could you explain to me, if we don't do this, what would be the detriment of St. Louis Water Department? Are we talking like maybe potentially Flint? Or what happened in there? Like, if the board say we will not pass a water increase in July, and we refuse to do it in January, what would be the outcome?
Well, we're not going to end up like Flint or Jackson, Mississippi overnight, but they were underfunded utilities too. And over time, we'll end up like that. It's like a game of Kerplunk, if you know that game. You keep pulling out one.
Oh, yeah, I was about to say, I'm young, but I think that's a little wood block thing you just.
Yeah, you keep pulling out little pieces of wood until the marbles all collapse. And right now our pumps at our treatment plants are 60 years old that pump the water from the river into the plant, and then the pumps that move it from the plant into the distribution system. They're failing fairly regular. If we don't have money to repair them as they fail, they're going to sit. And they're all the same age, so they'll continue to give out until we have no longer the ability to pump water. And I'm not sure how long that would take. That would take a while. But our needs are not cheap. And this Tam Avenue water main break that flooded the highway, that's going to probably cost us $60 million. I'm not 60 million. $1 million, I'm thinking 60-inch diameter pipe. Excuse me, I don't want to give anybody a heart attack, but it's bad enough. It's going to cost us probably $1 million to put a patch on it, and and that does nothing for the rest of the pipe.
I maybe missed the question, and maybe this isn't a question for you. Was there a potential that ARPA dollars could have been used to, clearly it would have been able to, it maybe just fill the gap because those are one-time spending, but.
Not for the repair of that pipe, I don't think, but.
Or just to the water division, because you guys.
There's some of that money could have been utilized in the water department. So, okay. But as I've said, the city has a lot of needs, and it's how there's a menu of needs.
Yeah, and I think we've used the ARPA dollars in a very good way. I was just curious, and thank you for being here. I think this is it's heavy. It's very heavy, especially when you have to do it. You're telling us we got to do it in 5 weeks, so that we don't continue to drown and then do it again in January. and messaging that out there to the public and in our some respective areas to tell constituents that I'm gonna take a vote to increase your water rate without being able to have the time to really assess it is, it's tough to do, to say the least, so, thank you.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of speak. I think what the residents that's listening need to understand, this isn't a current administration problem. This has been going on for over 20 years. And I can speak from that part. And so Paul Payne and I have worked together, and with the Capital Committee, we have looked at things, and for years, we were asking for stuff that we couldn't fund, and the Water Department was one of them. And so this isn't anything that just happened. This is something that had gone on, like I said, for over 20 years, and the neglect in the departments not being funded to get what they needed to just stabilize their departments. And so now we have a city that has pipes, as Alderwoman Schweitzer said, that is historic, because our pipes are historic in this city. And I don't think we will get to a Flint or in a Mississippi level, but I just think people need to take in consideration every time one of those pipes burst. And I just went down Bircher and saw the pipes that they took out of the street that they have to replace. You would be appalled to know how old they are and how they're crumbling. So that's a city issue. But as I said, in defense of them and Paul Payne and myself, I know from me sitting on those committee hearings and at that time, Ways and Means, the Water Department and other departments have come to us for years to try to get dollars. And I give credit to Paul Payne. He, you know how they say, get blood out of a turnip? He got a lot of blood out of some turnips, because I'm telling you, we were squeezing dollars trying to make things happen. So I understand the frustration in regards to the increase of the water bill, but as I said earlier, it's going to be increased across the city on different services, because for years things hadn't been done, and so now we're trying to play catch up to get stuff done. And so this administration is trying to play catch up with the dollars that they have. And as Kurt said, it's so much needs out there. Truthfully, we don't have enough to fill all the needs. And so Paul Payne always, this last time, he said this is the first time we've been in a situation where we had some dollars to work with. We just still don't have enough, because if we took all the ARPA dollars and all the federal dollars, we still wouldn't have enough to do what needs to be done. So thank you all. But I'm just concerned about my seniors and the people that are on set incomes, handicapped, people that can't afford the increases. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can do that and still halfway make sure that we get something to help them, you know, sustain those bills.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to echo that as well. I mean, you know, water in St. Louis is so unusual in that we typically don't meter the residential. So when you've got an increase, for example, on an electric bill, a resident could, you know, it's not pleasant, but reduce their energy consumption and reduce their bill. But when it comes to water, typically speaking, we don't have a water meter. So when the rate goes up, it just goes up. And, you know, it's based on the number of toilets that you have in your house and the number of rooms. So it's really not something that you as a resident, typically speaking, can impact or have any control over. So when we're raising rates, it really, I think we need to be careful about, you know, thinking about this. And even though we've been talking about this for many years, this is the first time I've had a clear understanding of the dire need for investment in our water department. You know, just a couple years ago, we had some folks here from the federal side talking about infrastructure, talking about the need for the new pipes, et cetera. And a 60-inch pipe, I gotta tell y'all, it's this big. It's a pretty big pipe. I'm 60 inches tall, so it's like a big, big pipe. But I have some real concerns here because, Director, I mean, even with this rate increase, as the Alderwoman from, Schweitzer pointed out, even with these rate increases, we are not meeting the cost of doing business with the expenditure category here. We have $74 million that we're planning to spend next year, and even with the rate increases, and even with an additional contract with, as you point out, St. Charles, which has not been signed yet, we are only generating revenue of $69 million. And so there's going to still be a gap. And what's even more alarming to me is that if we don't pass this, okay, and we are looking at a fire sale, a 5-week process of passing a pretty significant rate increase, we, over the last 4 years, had revenues from the water department of around $50 million. That's 53, 50, 49, 51. So right at $50 million, okay? And we have projected expenditures of $74 million. That's a gap of $24 million, which is right about exactly what we have in reserves. And as Ms. Burke pointed out, we don't even have access to all those reserves. So we are literally at the last critical moment here, and that is a terrifying place to be. And even though we may have had this in the back of our minds in the ether that, yeah, we have to increase the water department, blah, 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 it has never been articulated, in my opinion, to be this important. And so I just want to commend this committee for spending the time with all of our city departments, going through and asking, do you have what you need to operate? Because my fear is that the situation here with the water department is also the case in our tow division and all these other departments. We've already mentioned tow several times today, because you don't have room at the tow lot, because we don't have the infrastructure that we need to do the things we need to do. So I'm glad we're talking about this, but this is a truly, truly scary moment, because if we do run out of funds, we can't supplement with general funds. The ARPA money, as Alderman Aldridge pointed out, has already been spent on some projects. So what is the alternative? This is a pretty scary situation. So I have a couple of additional clarification questions just really quickly here. The $74 million that we have here for budgeted fiscal year 2024, does that include the infrastructure needs that were outlined a couple of years ago as far as the pipes, et cetera, beyond just the situation going on in the former 24th Ward?
There's not really a whole lot of infrastructure money in there. With it, we might be able to match some of the federal money that's going through the state. We should be able to repair things that break, but it's not a long-term gets us where we need to go. One thing to bear in mind, way we bill, we bill quarterly, and like meter accounts, we bill after the 3 months of consumption. So it takes a while we do a rate increase. It takes like 6 months for us to see the full benefit of it, because you're going through 2 billing cycles before you get to see the full benefit. So while we're a little bit short this year, if we get it, the following year we'll be in better shape.
So increasing these 2 rate increases of 20% each is just going to keep us floating above, floating through what we need to deliver as far as a water service. It does not even begin to address the infrastructure, the long-standing neglected infrastructure needs that we have within the pipes and the infrastructure for the water department. Is that correct?
Yes.
This is a heavy load. This is a lot, because we do have a lot of infrastructure needs under the streets and in the pipes, et cetera, beyond just being able to deliver water. I keep wanting to say like tapping into, I don't mean to have these puns, but with regards to like the amount of capacity that we have, the water production that we have versus the need for our citizens, do we have the capacity to sell more water, to be a provider? Why aren't we tapping into that?
It depends on the local needs of the adjacent utilities. If they have a need to buy more water, they can get it from us. But it's, we can't force them to buy more water from us.
Okay. So it's a supply and demand situation, and we're just able to supply whatever's demanded and.
Yeah, it's, you know, these other utilities, I assume they avoided having to expand their treatment facilities and make further investment. They can just simply buy water and cheaper than the long-term expense of owning and operating additional treatment.
Could you quantify for us, I know you probably can't do this today, but an understanding of how much infrastructure need we have on top of this? I mean, I think rather than coming to us in a couple of years and going, oh my gosh, these pipes are bursting, and, you know, I mean, having a full picture of the needs of the water department would be very helpful. I mean, what we're talking about getting to is just the very basic.
It gets us out of the hole and maybe sets us on a field to start planning for long-term future. And
the worst case scenario in my mind is that this is not a solvent utility and we have to end up selling it and we privatize our water like we considered doing several years ago, and we end up with a situation where we lose control, which is what happened in Flint. The state took over and they failed to do right by the folks there. You know, having it under our control, I think, is a really, really important thing. As Alderwoman Schweitzer alluded to, you know, the changing climate, water is going to become increasingly important, and as a city, having control of our water source, our water department, is such an incredibly important piece of being a solvent city and being a city that has control of its assets. I want to be able to maintain that, and I want to be able to do that with fiscal responsibility and with the responsibility of being able to deliver the services expected of our citizens. So you know, it would be helpful to have a full, clear picture of all the things that, even with this budget, you're not getting. It's really mind-blowing to me that we've been operating at such a deficit for so long, and this hasn't been just screaming out. With all due respect to the budget director, who probably has been, you know, communicating it, but Mr. Payne, you're not as loud as some of us tend to be. So I'm grateful to have this conversation. I am very concerned about passing a budget that includes a couple pieces that aren't actually ironed out yet, that we don't even have the details with. And I have to be honest, that just rubs me the wrong way. I don't think that's good budget process, policy in a general sense. So that's giving me a heartache that maybe the director of the budget director or others can help me through. But right now, those are my biggest concerns, that even with passing this, I think we're going to have some robust, extremely quick discussion about getting something, you know, that our residents are going to have to start paying for in 5 weeks to even meet this, and then the unmet need as a result of it. With that, we didn't even get into the issue of whether or not we have meters, et cetera. We have some. We do have overproduction of capacity, so that's maybe not totally necessary. But I do want to reiterate my gratitude for our water. It is a phenomenal product at the end of the day. You're obviously doing it with a shoestring budget, and we're very, very grateful. If you could get us those additional pieces of information, it will certainly help us. And with that, do we have any other questions from the committee? Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you listening to me and Perla coming, so thank you.
Appreciate your work. Oh, I did have one, just before we adjourn, one more question. You mentioned that the water commissioner underneath you is vacant. Why is that position vacant?
It's, I can do basically both functions at this time, and this is the way it's been. Even my predecessor, he was the director, and the commissioner's position is, it remained vacant.
So that's not something we should be alarmed about?
No. So it makes the reporting tree look like a totem pole, really.
Well, this is of paramount importance. I just think we've got to figure out how to get you what you need and make sure that we keep our utility solvent. Thank you. With
Thank
that,
you.
I'll take A motion to adjourn. Oh, thank you. I'll take a motion to excuse for necessary absence, Tom Oldenburg, and that's it, right? Yeah, thanks. Okay, do I hear a motion? So moved. Hearing no objection, Mr. Oldenburg is excused, and with that.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you. All right, the Budget and Public Employees Committee is now adjourned.